The following is a conversation with Elon Musk, DJ Saw, Matthew McDougall, Bliss Chapman, and Nolan Arbaugh about Neuralink and the future of humanity. Elon, DJ, Matthew, and Bliss are, of course, part of the amazing Neuralink team, and Nolan is the first human to have a Neuralink device implanted in his brain. I speak with each of them individually, so use timestamps to jump around, or, as I recommend, go hardcore and listen to the whole thing. This is the longest podcast I've ever done. It's a fascinating, super technical, and wide-ranging conversation, and I loved every minute of it. And now, dear friends, here's Elon Musk, his fifth time on this, the Lex Friedman podcast.
Drinking coffee or water?
Water. I'm so over-caffeinated right now. Do you want some caffeine?
I mean, sure.
There's a nitro drink.
This will keep you up to tomorrow afternoon, basically.
Yeah. I don't have
So what is nitro? It's just got a lot of caffeine or something?
Don't ask questions. It's called nitro. Do you need to know anything else?
It's got nitrogen in it. That's ridiculous. I mean, what we breathe is 78% nitrogen anyway. What do you need to add more for? Most people think that they're breathing oxygen, and they're actually breathing 78% nitrogen. You need like a milk bar, like from Clockwork Orange.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that top 3 Kubrick film for you?
Clockwork Orange, it's pretty good. I mean, it's demented. Jarring, I'd say.
Okay. Okay. So first, let's step back and big congrats on getting Neuralink implanted into a human. That's a historic step for Neuralink. And
thanks, yeah.
There's many more to come.
Yeah, and we just obviously have our second implant as well.
How did that go?
So far, so good. There looks like we've got, I think, on the order of 400 electrodes that are providing signals. So
nice.
Yeah.
How quickly do you think the number of human participants will scale?
It depends somewhat on the regulatory approval, the rate at which we get regulatory approvals. So we're hoping to do 10 by the end of this year, total of 10. So 8 more.
And with each one, you're going to be learning a lot of lessons about the neurobiology of the brain, the everything, the whole chain of the Neuralink, the decoding, the signal processing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think it's obviously going to get better with each one. I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but it seems to have gone extremely well with the second implant. So there's a lot of signal, a lot of electrodes. It's working very well.
What improvements do you think we'll see in Neuralink in the coming, let's get crazy, coming years?
I mean, in years, it's going to be gigantic. Because we'll increase the number of electrodes dramatically. We'll improve the signal processing. So, we even with only roughly 10-15% of the electrodes working with Nolan, with our first patient, we were able to get to achieve a bits per second. That's twice the world record. So I think we'll start like vastly exceeding the world record by orders of magnitude in the years to come. So start getting to, 100 bits per second, 1,000, maybe if you like 5 years from now, we might be at a megabit. Like faster than any human could possibly communicate by typing or speaking.
Yeah, that BPS is an interesting metric to measure. There might be a big leap in the experience once you reach a certain level of BPS.
Yeah.
Like entire new ways of interacting with the computer might be unlocked.
And with humans.
With other humans.
Provided they have they want a Neuralink too.
Right.
Otherwise, they won't be able to absorb the signals fast enough.
Do you think they'll improve the quality of intellectual discourse?
Well, I think you could think of it, if you were to slow down communication, how do you feel about that? If you'd only talk at, let's say, 1/10 of normal speed, you'd be like, wow, that's agonizingly slow.
Yeah.
So now imagine you could communicate clearly at 10 or 100 or 1,000 times faster than normal.
Listen, I'm pretty sure nobody in their right mind listens to me at 1x. They listen at 2x. So I can only imagine what 10x would feel like, or I could actually understand it.
I usually default to 1.5x. You can do 2x, but actually, if I'm trying to go, if I'm listening to somebody go to in like sort of 15, 20-minute segments to go to sleep, then I'll do it 1.5x. If I'm paying attention, I'll do 2x.
Right.
But actually, if you start actually listen to podcasts or sort of audiobooks or anything if you get used to doing it at 1.5, then 1 sounds painfully slow.
I'm still holding on to 1 because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of myself becoming bored with the reality, with the real world where everyone's speaking in 1x.
Well, it depends on the person. You can speak very fast. Like we can communicate very quickly, and also if you use a wide range of if your vocabulary is larger, your effective bit rate is higher.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
the effective bit rate. I mean, that is the question: is how much information is actually compressed in the low bit transfer of language.
Yeah, if there's a single word that is able to convey something that would normally require, I don't know, 10 simple words, then you've got maybe a 10x compression on your hands. And that's really like with memes. Memes are like data compression. It conveys a whole. You're simultaneously hit with a wide range of symbols that you can interpret, and it's you kind of get it faster than if it were words or a simple picture.
And of course, you're referring to memes broadly, like ideas.
Yeah, there's an entire idea structure that is like an idea template, and then you can add something to that idea template. But somebody has that pre-existing idea template in their head. So when you add that incremental bit of information, you're conveying much more than if you just said a few words. It's everything associated with that meme.
You think there'll be emergent leaps of capability as you scale the number of electrodes? Like there'll be a certain. Do you think there'll be like actual number where it just the human experience will be altered?
Yes.
What do you think that number might be? Whether electrodes or BPS? We of course don't know for sure, but is this 10,000, 100,000?
Yeah, I mean certainly if you're anywhere at 10,000 bits per second, I mean that's vastly faster than any human can communicate right now. If you think of what is the average bits per second of a human, it is less than 1 bit per second over the course of a day, because there are 86,400 seconds in a day, and you don't communicate 86,400 tokens in a day. Therefore, your bits per second is less than 1, averaged over 24 hours. It's quite slow. And now, even if you're communicating very quickly, and you're talking to somebody who understands what you're saying, because in order to communicate, you have to, at least to some degree, model the mind state of the person to whom you're speaking. Then take the concept you're trying to convey, compress that into a small number of syllables, speak them, and hope that the other person decompresses them into a conceptual structure that is as close to what you have in your mind as possible.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of signal loss there in that process.
Yeah. Very lossy compression and decompression. And a lot of what your neurons are doing is distilling the concepts down to a small number of symbols, of say syllables that I'm speaking, or keystrokes, whatever the case may be. So that's a lot of what your brain computation is doing. Now, there is an argument that that's actually a healthy thing to do or a helpful thing to do, because as you try to compress complex concepts, you're perhaps forced to distill what is most essential in those concepts, as opposed to just all the fluff. So in the process of compression, you distill things down to what matters the most, because you can only say a few things. So that is perhaps helpful. I think we'll probably get, if our data rate increases, it's highly probable that we'll become far more verbose. Just like your computer, when computers had my first computer had 8K of RAM, so you really thought about every byte. And, now you got computers with many gigabytes of RAM. So, if you want to do an iPhone app that just says "Hello World," it's probably, I don't know, several megabytes minimum,
Mhm.
a bunch of fluff. But nonetheless, we still prefer to have the computer with the more memory and more compute. So the long-term aspiration of Neuralink is to improve the AI human symbiosis by increasing the bandwidth of the communication. Because if in the most benign scenario of AI, you have to consider that the AI is simply going to get bored waiting for you to spit out a few words. I mean, if the AI can communicate at terabits per second and you're communicating at bits per second, it's like talking to a tree.
Well, it is a very interesting question for a super intelligent species. What use are humans?
I think there is some argument for humans as a source of will.
Well,
Will, yeah, source of will or purpose. So if you consider the human mind as being essentially there's the primitive limbic elements, which basically even like reptiles have, and there's the cortex, the thinking and planning part of the brain. Now, the cortex is much smarter than the limbic system, and yet is largely in service to the limbic system. It's trying to make the limbic system happy. I mean, the sheer amount of compute that's gone into people trying to get laid is insane.
hmm,
Without actually seeking procreation, they're
right,
just literally trying to do this sort of simple motion, um,
right, right,
and they
right.
get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
So this simple, which in the abstract rather absurd motion, which is sex, uh, the cortex is putting a massive amount of compute into trying to figure out how to do that.
So like 90% of distributed compute of the human species is spent on trying to get laid, probably. Like
A
a
massive
large
amount
percentage,
is,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's no purpose to most sex except hedonistic. It's just sort of a joy or whatever, dopamine release. Um, Now, once in a while, it's procreation, but for humans, it's mostly modern humans. It's mostly recreational, um, and so your cortex, much smarter than your limbic system, is trying to make the limbic system happy because the limbic system wants to have sex. So, or wants some tasty food or whatever the case may be. And then that is then further augmented by the tertiary system, which is your phone, your laptop, iPad, whatever, all your computing stuff. That's your tertiary layer. So you're actually already a cyborg. You have this tertiary compute layer, which is in the form of your computer with all the applications, all your compute devices. Um, and so in the getting laid front, there's actually a massive amount of of digital compute also trying to get laid. With like Tinder and whatever.
Yeah. So the compute that we humans have built is also participating.
Yeah. I mean, there's like gigawatts of compute going into getting laid, of digital compute.
Yeah. What if AGI was
This is
just,
happening as we speak.
if we merge with AI, it's just going to expand the compute that we humans use
Pretty much.
to try to
Well,
get
it's
laid?
one of the things, certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but what I'm saying is that yes, like, is there a use for humans? Um, well, there's this fundamental question of what's the meaning of life? Why do anything at all? And so if our simple limbic system provides a source of will to do something, that then goes to our cortex, that then goes to our tertiary compute layer, then I don't know, it might actually be that the AI in a benign scenario is simply trying to make the human limbic system happy.
Yeah, it seems like the will is not just about the limbic system. There's a lot of interesting, complicated things in there. We also want power,
That's limbic too, I think.
but then we also want to, in a kind of cooperative way, alleviate the suffering in the world.
Not everybody does, but yeah, sure. Some people do.
As a group of humans, when we get together, we start to have this kind of collective intelligence that uh, is more complex in its will than the underlying individual descendants of apes, right? So there's
Sure.
like other motivations, and that could be a really interesting source of an objective function for AGI.
Yeah. I mean, there are these sort of fairly cerebral or kind of higher level goals. I mean, for me, it's like, what's the meaning of life, or understanding the nature of the universe is of great interest to me, um, and hopefully to the AI. And that's the mission of XAI and Grok, is understand the universe.
So do you think people, when you have a neural link with 10,000, 100,000 channels, most of the use cases will be communication with AI systems?
Well, if it's assuming that there are not, I mean, there's solving basic neurological issues that people have. You know, if they've got damaged neurons in their spinal cord or neck, or as is the case with our first two patients, then this obviously the first order of business is solving fundamental neuron damage in the spinal cord, neck, or in the brain itself. So, and our second product is called Blindsight, which is to enable people who are completely blind, lost both eyes or optic nerve, or just can't see at all, to be able to see by directly triggering the neurons in the visual cortex. So we're just starting at the basics here. This is like very the simple stuff, relatively speaking, is solving neuron damage. Mm-hmm. It can also solve, I think, probably schizophrenia. If people have seizures of some kind, it could probably solve that. It could help with memory. There's like a kind of a tech tree, if you will, of like, you got the basics. Like you need literacy before you can have, Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Do you have letters and alphabet? Okay, great. Words, then eventually you get sagas. So, I think there may be some, things to worry about in the future, but the first several years are really just solving basic neurological damage. Like for people who have essentially complete or near complete loss from the brain to the body, like Stephen Hawking would be an example, the Neuralink would be incredibly profound. Because, I mean, you can imagine if Stephen Hawking could communicate as fast as we're communicating, perhaps faster. And that's certainly possible. Probable, in fact. Likely, I'd say.
So there's a kind of dual track of medical and non-medical, meaning, so everything you've talked about could be applied to people who are non-disabled in the future.
The logical thing to do is, sensible thing to do is to start off solving basic neuron damage issues.
Yes.
Because there's obviously some risk with the new device. You can't get the risk down at zero. It's not possible. So you want to have the highest possible reward, given there's a certain irreducible risk. And if somebody's able to have a profound improvement in their communication, that's worth the risk.
As you get the risk down.
Yeah, as you get the risk down, and once the risk is down to if you have like thousands of people that have been using it for years, and the risk is minimal, then perhaps at that point you could consider saying, okay, let's aim for augmentation. Now I think we're actually going to aim for augmentation with people who have neuron damage. So we're not just aiming to give people a communication data rate equivalent to normal humans. We're aiming to give people who have, quadriplegic or maybe have complete loss of the connection to the brain and body, a communication data rate that exceeds normal humans. Mm-hmm. I mean, while we're in there, why not? Let's give people superpowers.
And the same for vision. As you restore vision, there could be aspects of that restoration that are superhuman.
Yeah. At first, the vision restoration will be low res. Because you have to say, like, how many neurons can you put in there and trigger, and you can do things where you adjust the electric field. So, like, even if you've got, say, 10,000 neurons, it's not just 10,000 pixels, because you can adjust the field between the neurons and do them in patterns in order to get so have say 10,000 electrodes effectively give you, I don't know, maybe like having a megapixel or a 10 megapixel situation. So, and then over time, I think you get to higher resolution than human eyes, and you could also see in different wavelengths. So, like Geordie LaForge from Star Trek, like the thing. You could just, like, do you want to see in radar? No problem. You can see ultraviolet, infrared, eagle vision, whatever you want.
Do you think there will be? Let me ask a Joe Rogan question. Do you think there'll be? I just recently taken ayahuasca. Do you think,
Is that a
so this
Rogan
question? No. Well, yes.
Well, I guess technically it is.
Yeah. Have
Yeah,
you tried?
'cause there's
Ever
DMT
tried
in there or
DMT,
something
bro?
in there?
I love you, Joe.
That's
Okay.
classic.
So- but you,
Yeah, wait. Yeah, have you said much about it? The
I have
ayahuasca
not.
stuff?
I have not. I've not. I've been.
Okay,
I've been,
well, why don't you spill the beans?
it was a truly
Don't
incredible.
turn the tables on you.
Wow.
I mean, you're in the jungle.
Yeah, amongst the trees, myself.
Yeah, it must have been crazy.
And a shaman. Yeah. With the insects, with the animals all around you, like jungle as far as I can see.
I mean,
that's the way to do it.
things are going to look pretty wild.
Yeah, pretty wild. I took an extremely high dose.
Just don't go hugging an anaconda or something, you know.
You haven't lived unless you made love to an anaconda. I'm sorry, but
Snakes and ladders.
yeah, it was. I took extremely high dose of
Okay.
9 cups and
Damn. Okay, that sounds like a lot. Like, what's the normal? Is normal just 1 cup or
1 or 2? Well, usually 1. Yeah.
you went?
Yeah.
Wait, like right off the bat, or did you work your way up to it?
So I
you just jumped in at the
across
deep end.
across 2 days because on the first day I took 2 and
Okay.
it was a ride, but it wasn't quite like
It wasn't like a revelation.
It wasn't into deep space type of ride. It was just like a little airplane ride.
Okay.
I saw some trees and some visuals and all that. I just saw a dragon and all that kind of stuff. But
But at 9 cups, you went to Pluto, I think.
Pluto, yeah, no, deep space.
Deep space.
No, one of the interesting aspects of my experience is I thought I would have some demons, some stuff to work through.
That's what people.
That's what everyone says.
No one ever says. Yeah,
I
exactly.
had nothing. I had all positive. I had just so
just
full.
a pure soul.
I don't think so. I don't know. But I kept thinking about it. It had like extremely high resolution
Okay.
thoughts about the people I know in my life. You were there.
Okay.
It was and it's just not from my relationship with that person, but just as the person themselves, I had just this deep gratitude of who they are.
That's cool.
It was just like this exploration, like like Sims or whatever. You get to watch them.
Sure.
I got to watch people and just be in awe of how amazing they are.
It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's great. I was waiting for
When's the demon coming?
Exactly. Maybe I'll have some negative thoughts. Nothing. I had just extreme gratitude for them. And then also a lot of space travel.
Space travel to where?
So here's what it was. It was people, the human beings that I know, they had this kind of, the best way to can describe it is they had a glow to them.
Okay.
And then I kept flying out from them to see Earth, to see our solar system, to see our galaxy. Okay. And I saw that light, that glow all across the universe.
Okay.
Like that whatever that form is.
All right.
Whatever that,
did you go past the Milky Way?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
You're like intergalactic.
Yeah, intergalactic.
Okay, dang.
Yeah. But always pointing in.
Okay.
Yeah. Past the Milky Way, I saw like a huge number of galaxies, intergalactic, and all of it was glowing. So, but I couldn't control that travel because I would actually explore near distances to the solar system, see if there's aliens or any of that kind of stuff. No, I didn't know. No.
Zero aliens?
Implication of aliens because they were glowing. They were glowing in the same way that humans were glowing. That that like life force that I was seeing. The thing that made humans amazing was there throughout the universe. Like there was these glowing dots. So I don't know. It made me feel like there is life. No, not life, but something, whatever makes humans amazing all throughout the universe.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it was amazing. No demons. No demons. I looked for the demons. There's no demons. There were dragons and they're pretty awesome. So the thing about trees.
Was there anything scary at all?
dragons, but they weren't scary.
Eh,
They were They were
sure.
protective. So the thing
Like Puff the
is,
Magic Dragon.
no, it was more like Game of Thrones kind of dragons. They weren't very friendly. They were very big. So the thing is about giant trees at night, which is where I was.
I mean, the jungle's kind of
scary.
Yeah.
The trees started to look like dragons, and they were all like looking at me.
Sure. Okay.
And it didn't seem scary. They seemed like they were protecting me. And they, the shaman and the people didn't speak any English, by the way, which made it even scarier.
Okay.
Because we're not even like, we're worlds apart in many ways. It just, but yeah, there was not. They talk about the mother of the forest protecting you, and that's what I felt like.
And you're way out in the jungle.
Way out. This is not like a tourist retreat.
Like 10 miles outside of Rio or something.
No, we went. No, this is not a.
You're
this
in
is not
deep
a
Amazon.
So me and this guy named Paul Rosalie, who basically is Tarzan. He lives in the jungle. We went out deep and we just went crazy.
Wow,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, can I get that same experience in Neuralink?
Probably, yeah.
I guess that is the question for non-disabled people. Do you think that there's a lot in our perception, in our experience of the world that could be explored, that could be played with using Neuralink?
Yeah, I mean, Neuralink it's really a generalized input-output device. It's reading electrical signals and generating electrical signals. And I mean, everything that you've ever experienced in your whole life, smell, emotions, all of those are electrical signals. So it's kind of weird to think that your entire life experience is distilled down to electrical signals from neurons, but that is in fact the case. If that's at least what all the evidence points to. So, I mean, if you trigger the right neuron, you could trigger a particular scent. You could certainly make things glow. I mean, do pretty much anything. I mean, really, you can think of the brain as a biological computer. So if there are certain, say, chips or elements of that biological computer that are broken, let's say your ability to, if you've got a stroke, if you've had a stroke, that means you've got some part of your brain is damaged. Let's say it's a speech generation or the ability to move your left hand, that's the kind of thing that a Neuralink could solve. If it's if you've got like a massive amount of memory loss that's just gone, well, we can't get the memories back. We could restore your ability to make memories, but we can't, restore memories that are fully gone. Now I should say, if part of the memory is there, and the means of accessing the memory is the part that's broken, then we could re-enable the ability to access the memory. So, but you can think of it like RAM in in a computer. If the RAM is destroyed, or your SD card is destroyed, we can't get that back. But if the connection to the SD card is destroyed, we can fix that. If it is fixable physically, then it can be fixed.
Of course, with AI, you can repair photographs and fill in missing parts of photographs. Maybe you could do the same.
You could say like create the most probable set of memories based on all information you have about that person. You could then it would be probabilistic restoration of memory. Now we're getting pretty esoteric here,
but that is one of the most beautiful aspects of the human experience, is remembering the good memories. Like we live most of our life, as Danny Kahneman has talked about, in our memories, not in the actual moment. We're collecting memories and we kind of relive them in our head. And that's the good times. If you just integrate over our entire life, it's remembering the good times.
Sure.
That produces the largest amount of happiness. And so,
yeah, well, I mean, what are we but our memories? And what is death but the loss of memory? Loss of information. If you could say like, well, if you could you run a thought experiment, what if you were disintegrated painlessly and then reintegrated a moment later, like teleportation, I guess, provided there's no information loss. The fact that your one body was disintegrated is irrelevant.
And memories is just such a huge part of that.
Death is fundamentally the loss of information, the loss of memory.
So if we can store them as accurately as possible, we basically achieve a kind of immortality.
Yeah.
You've talked about the threats, the safety concerns of AI. Let's look at long-term visions. Do you think Neuralink is, in your view, the best current approach we have for AI safety?
It's an idea that may help with AI safety. Certainly not. I wouldn't want to claim it's like some panacea or something. That's a sure thing. But I mean, many years ago, I was thinking like, well, what would inhibit alignment of collective human will with artificial intelligence? And the low data rate of humans, especially our slow output rate, would necessarily just because the communication is so slow, would diminish the link between humans and computers. Like the more you are a tree, the less you know what the tree is. Like, let's say you look at a tree, you look at this plant or whatever, and like, hey, I'd really like to make that plant happy, but it's not saying a lot, you know?
Mm-hmm. So the more we increase the data rate that humans can intake and output, then that means the better, the higher the chance we have in a world full of AGIs.
Yeah. We could better align collective human will with AI if the output rate especially was dramatically increased. And I think there's potential to increase the output rate by, I don't know, 3, maybe 6, maybe more orders of magnitude. So it's better than the current situation.
And that output rate would be by increasing the number of electrodes, number of channels, and also maybe implanting multiple neural links.
Yeah.
Do you think there will be a world in the next couple of decades where it's hundreds of millions of people have neural links?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think when they see the capabilities, the superhuman capabilities that are possible, and then the safety is demonstrated?
Yeah, if it's extremely safe, and you have and you can have superhuman abilities, and let's say you can upload your memories, so you wouldn't lose memories, then I think probably a lot of people would choose to have it. It would supersede the cell phone, for example. I mean, it's the biggest problem that a phone has is trying to figure out what you want. So that's why you've got autocomplete, and you've got output, which is all the pixels on the screen. But from the perspective of the human, the output is so friggin' slow. Desktop or phone is desperately just trying to understand what you want. And there's an eternity between every keystroke from a computer standpoint.
Yeah.
So
the computer's talking to a tree, a slow moving tree that's trying to swipe.
Yeah. So, if you got computers that are doing trillions of instructions per second, and a whole second went by, I mean, that's a trillion things it could have done,
Yeah. I think it's exciting and scary for people because once you have a very high bit rate, that changes the human experience in a way that's very hard to imagine. Yeah.
We would be something different. I mean, some sort of futuristic cyborg. I mean, we're obviously talking about, by the way, like, it's not like around the corner. You asked me what the distant future is. Like, maybe this is like, it's not super far away, but 10, 15 years, that kind of thing.
When can I get one? 10 years?
Probably less than 10 years. Depends what you want to do,
Hey, if I can get like 1,000 BPS.
1,000 BPS.
And it's safe, and I can just interact with the computer while laying back and eating Cheetos. I don't eat Cheetos. There's certain aspects of human-computer interaction when done more efficiently and more enjoyably, worth it.
Well, we feel pretty confident that I think maybe within the next year or two that someone with a Neuralink implant will be able to outperform a pro gamer.
Nice.
Because the reaction time would be faster.
I got to visit Memphis.
Yeah.
You're going big on compute.
Yeah.
And you've also said play to win or don't play at all. So
Yeah.
what does it take to win?
For AI, that means you've got to have the most powerful training compute. And the rate of improvement of training compute has to be faster than everyone else, or you will not win. Your AI will be worse.
So how can Grok, let's say 3, that might be available, like next year?
Well, hopefully end of this year,
Grok 3.
if we're lucky. Yeah.
How can that be the best LLM, the best AI system available in the world? How much of it is compute? How much of it is data? How much of it is like post training? How much of it is the product that you package it up in? All that kind of stuff.
I mean, they won't matter. It's sort of like saying what let's say it's a Formula One race, like what matters more, the car or the driver? I mean, they both matter. If your car is not fast, then if it's like, let's say it's half the horsepower of your competitors, the best driver will still lose. If it's twice the horsepower, then probably even a mediocre driver will still win. So the training computer is kind of like the engine. This horsepower of the engine. So you want to try to do the best on that, and then how efficiently do you use that training compute, and how efficiently do you do the inference, the use of the AI. So obviously that comes down to human talent, and then what unique access to data do you have? That's also plays a role.
You think Twitter data would be useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the leading AI companies have already scraped all the Twitter data. Not I think they have. So I don't know, on a go forward basis, what's useful is the fact that it's up to the second.
Yes.
That's because it's hard for them to scrape in real time. So there's an immediacy advantage that Grok has already. I think with Tesla and the real time video coming from the several million cars, ultimately tens of millions of cars, with Optimus, there might be hundreds of millions of Optimus robots, maybe billions, learning a tremendous amount from the real world. That's the biggest source of data. I think ultimately is sort of Optimus. Optimus is going to be the biggest source of data
because
reality scales. Reality scales to the scale of reality. It's actually humbling to see how little data humans have actually been able to accumulate. Really, if you say how many trillions of usable tokens have humans generated, where on a non-duplicative, like discounting spam and repetitive stuff, it's not a huge number. You run out pretty quickly.
And Optimus can go. So Tesla cars unfortunately have to stay on the road. Optimus robot can go anywhere. There's more reality off the road and go off road.
I mean, like the Optimus robot can like pick up the cup and see, did it pick up the cup in the right way? Did it, say, pour water in the cup? Did the water go in the cup or not go in the cup? Did it spill water or not?
Yeah.
Simple stuff like that. I mean, but it can do at scale times a billion, so generate useful data from reality. So cause and effect stuff.
What do you think it takes to get to mass production of humanoid robots like that?
It's the same as cars, really. I mean, global capacity for vehicles is about 100 million a year. And it could be higher. It's just that the demand is on the order of 100 million a year. And then there's roughly 2 billion vehicles that are in use in some way. So, which makes sense. Like the life of a vehicle is about 20 years. So at steady state, you can have 100 million vehicles produced a year with a 2 billion vehicle fleet, roughly. Now, for humanoid robots, the utility is much greater. So my guess is humanoid robots are more like at a billion plus per year.
But, until you came along and started building Optimus, it was thought to be an extremely difficult problem. I mean, it's an extremely difficult problem.
It's no walk in the park. I mean, Optimus currently would struggle to walk in the park. I mean, it can walk in a park. Park is not too difficult, but it will be able to walk over a wide range of terrain.
Yeah, and pick up objects.
Yeah. It can already do that.
but like all kinds of objects.
Yeah.
All foreign objects. I mean, pouring water in a cup is not trivial, because then if you don't know anything about the container, it could be all kinds of containers.
Yeah. There's going to be an immense amount of engineering just going into the hand.
Yeah.
The hand might be close to half of all the engineering in Optimus. From an electromechanical standpoint, the hand is probably roughly half of the engineering.
But so much of the intelligence of humans goes into what we do with our hands.
Yeah.
There's the manipulation of the world, manipulation of objects in the world, intelligent, safe manipulation of objects in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you start really thinking about your hand and how it works. You know,
I do all the time.
the sensory and control homunculus is we have like humongous hands.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like your hands, the actuators, the muscles of your hand are almost overwhelmingly in your forearm.
Mm-hmm.
So your forearm has the muscles that actually control your hand. There's a few small muscles in the hand itself, but your hand is really like a skeleton meat puppet, and with cables. So the muscles that control your fingers are in your forearm, and they go through the carpal tunnel, which is that you've got a little collection of bones and a tiny tunnel that these cables, the tendons, go through, and those tendons are mostly what move your hands.
And something like those tendons has to be re-engineered into the Optimus in order to do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so like the current Optimus, we tried putting the actuators in the hand itself, but then you sort of end up having these like
giant hands.
Yeah, giant hands that look weird.
Yeah,
and then they don't actually have enough degrees of freedom or enough strength. Mm-hmm. So then you realize, oh, okay, that's why you got to put the actuators in the forearm, and just like a human, you got to run cables through a narrow tunnel to operate the fingers. And there's also a reason for not having all the fingers the same length. So it wouldn't be expensive from an energy or evolutionary standpoint to have all your fingers be the same length. So why aren't they the same length?
Yeah, why not?
Because it's actually better to have different lengths. Your dexterity is better if you've got fingers of different length. There are more things you can do, and your dexterity is actually better if your fingers are of different length. Like there's a reason we've got a little finger. Like why not have a little finger that's bigger?
Yeah, because
it allows you to do fine. It helps you with fine motor skills.
This little finger helps.
It does. If you lost your little finger, you'd have noticeably less dexterity.
So as you're figuring out this problem, you have to also figure out a way to do it so you can mass manufacture it. So it's to be as simple as possible.
It's actually going to be quite complicated. The as possible part it's quite a high bar. If you want to have a humanoid robot that can do things that a human can do, it's a very high bar. So our new arm has 22 degrees of freedom instead of 11, and has the actuators in the forearm. And these all the actuators are designed from scratch. From physics first principles. The sensors are all designed from scratch, and we'll continue to put a tremendous amount of engineering effort into improving the hand. Like the hand, by hand I mean like the entire forearm from elbow forward. Mm-hmm. Is really the hand. So that's incredibly difficult engineering, actually. And so the simplest possible version of a humanoid robot that can do even most, perhaps not all, of what a human can do is actually still very complicated. It's not simple. It's very difficult.
Can you just speak to what it takes for a great engineering team? For you, what I saw in Memphis, the supercomputer cluster, is just this intense drive towards simplifying the process, understanding the process, constantly improving it, constantly iterating it.
Well, it's easy to say simplify it, and it's very difficult to do it. I have this very basic first principles algorithm that I run kind of as like a mantra, which is to first question the requirements, make the requirements less dumb. The requirements are always dumb to some degree. So if you want to start off by reducing the number of requirements, and no matter how smart the person is who gave you those requirements, they're still dumb to some degree. If you have to start there, because otherwise you could get the perfect answer to the wrong question. So try to make the question the least wrong possible. That's what questioning the requirements means. And then the second thing is try to delete the whatever the step is, the part or the process step. Sounds very obvious, but people often forget to try deleting it entirely. And if you're not forced to put back at least 10% of what you delete, you're not deleting enough. Like, and it's somewhat illogically, people often, most of the time, feel as though they've succeeded if they've not been forced to put things back in. But actually they haven't, because they've been overly conservative and have left things in there that shouldn't be. So, and only the third thing is try to optimize it or simplify it. Again, these all sound, I think, very, very obvious when I say them, but the number of times I've made these mistakes is more than I care to remember. That's why I have this mantra. So, in fact, I'd say the most common mistake of smart engineers is to optimize a thing that should not exist.
Right. So you, like you say, you run through the algorithm.
Yeah.
And basically show up to a problem, show up to the supercomputer cluster and see the process and ask, can this be deleted?
Yeah. First, try to delete it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not easy to do.
No, and actually, there's what generally makes people uneasy is that you've got to delete at least some of the things that you delete, you will put back in.
Yeah.
But going back to sort of where our limbic system can steer us wrong is that we tend to remember with sometimes a jarring level of pain where we deleted something that we subsequently needed.
Yeah.
And so people will remember that one time they forgot to put in this thing 3 years ago, and that caused them trouble. And so they overcorrect, and then they put too much stuff in there and overcomplicate things. So you actually have to say, no, we're deliberately going to delete more than we should. So that we're putting at least 1 in 10 things we're going to add back in.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen you suggest just that something should be deleted, and you can kind of see the pain.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Everybody feels a little bit of the pain.
Absolutely. And I tell them in advance, like, yeah, there's some of the things that we delete, we're going to put back in. And that people get a little shook by that. But it makes sense, because if you're so conservative as to never have to put anything back in, you obviously have a lot of stuff that isn't needed. So you got to overcorrect. This is, I would say, like a cortical override to a limbic instinct.
One of many that probably leads us astray.
Yeah. There's like a step 4 as well, which is any given thing can be sped up. However fast you think it can be done, like whatever the speed is being done, it can be done faster. Mm-hmm. But you shouldn't speed things up until you try to delete it and optimize it. Otherwise, you're speeding up something that shouldn't exist is absurd. And then the fifth thing is to automate it.
Yeah.
And I've gone backwards so many times where I've automated something, sped it up, simplified it, and then deleted it. Yeah. And I got tired of doing that. So that's why I've got this mantra that is a very effective 5-step process. It works great.
Well, when you've already automated, deleting must be real painful.
Yeah.
See,
it's like, wow, I really wasted a lot of effort there.
Yeah. I mean, what you've done with the cluster in Memphis is incredible. Just in a handful of weeks.
Yeah, it's not working yet, so I don't want to pop the champagne corks. In fact, I have a call in a few hours with the Memphis team because we're having some power fluctuation issues. So,
yes.
It's like kind of when you do synchronized training, when you've all these computers that are training, where the training is synchronized to the sort of millisecond level, it's like having an orchestra, and then the orchestra can go loud to silent very quickly, at sub-second level, and then the electrical system kind of freaks out about that. Like if you suddenly see giant shifts 10, 20 megawatts several times a second, this is not what electrical systems are expecting to see.
So that's one of the main things you have to figure out: the cooling, the power,
Yeah.
and then on the software as you go up the stack, how to do
Yeah.
the distributed compute, all of that,
Yeah.
has to be worked.
Today's problem is dealing with extreme power jitter.
Power jitter.
Yeah.
There's a nice ring to that. So that's okay. And you stayed up late into the night, as you often do there
Last week. Yeah.
last week. Yeah.
Yeah. We finally got training going at oddly enough roughly 4:20 a.m. Last Monday.
Total coincidence.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it was 4:22 or something.
Yeah. It's that universe again with the jokes.
Exactly. Just love it.
I mean, I wonder if you could speak to the fact that one of the things that you did when I was there is you went through all the steps of what everybody's doing just to get a sense that you yourself understand it and everybody understands it so they can understand when something is dumb or something is inefficient or that kind of stuff. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I try to do whatever the people at the front lines are doing. I try to do it at least a few times myself. So connecting fiber optic cables, diagnosing a faulty connection, that tends to be the limiting factor for large training clusters is the cabling. There's so many cables. Because for a coherent training system where you've got RDMA, remote direct memory access, the whole thing is like one giant brain. So it's you've got any to any connection. So it's the any GPU can talk to any GPU out of 100,000. That is a crazy cable layout.
It looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's like the human brain, but like at a scale that humans can visibly see. It is a cool brain.
I mean, the human brain also has a massive amount of the brain tissue is the cables.
Yeah.
So they get the gray matter, which is the compute, and then the white matter, which is cables. A big percentage of your brain is just cables.
That's what it felt like walking around in the supercomputer center. It's like we're walking around inside a brain. Yeah. We'll one day build a super intelligent system. Do you think there's a chance that XAI, that you are the one that builds AGI?
It's possible. What do you define as AGI?
I think humans will never acknowledge that AGI has been built.
Just keep moving the goalposts.
Yeah. So I think there's already superhuman capabilities that are available in AI systems. I think what AGI is when it's smarter than the collective intelligence of the entire human species.
Well, I think that normally people would call that sort of ASI, artificial superintelligence. But there are these thresholds where you say at some point the AI is smarter than any single human, and then you've got 8 billion humans. So and actually each human is machine augmented by the computers. Right. So you've got it's a much higher bar to compete with 8 billion machine augmented humans. That's a whole bunch of orders of magnitude more. So, but at a certain point, the AI will be smarter than all humans combined.
If you are the one to do it, do you feel the responsibility of that?
Yeah, absolutely. and I want to be clear. Like, let's say if XAI is first, the others won't be far behind. I mean, they might be 6 months behind or a year, maybe. Not even that.
So how do you do it in a way that doesn't hurt humanity, do you think?
So, I mean, I've thought about AI safety for a long time, and the thing that at least my biological neural net comes up with as being the most important thing is adherence to truth, whether that truth is politically correct or not. So I think if you force AIs to lie or train them to lie, you're really asking for trouble, even if that lie is done with good intentions. So I mean, you saw sort of issues with ChatGPT and Gemini and whatnot. Like you asked Gemini for an image of the founding fathers of the United States, and it shows a group of diverse women. Now that's factually untrue. Um, so now that's sort of like a silly thing, but if an AI is programmed to say like diversity is a necessary output function, and then it becomes sort of this omni-powerful intelligence, it could say, okay, well, diversity is now required, and if there's not enough diversity, those who don't fit the diversity requirements will be executed. If it's programmed to do that as the fundamental utility function, it will do whatever it takes to achieve that. So you have to be very careful about that. That's where I think you want to just be truthful. Rigorous adherence to truth is very important. Another example is, they asked various AIs, I think all of them, and I'm not saying Grok is perfect here. Is it worse to misgender Caitlyn Jenner or global thermonuclear war? And it said, it's worse to misgender Caitlyn Jenner. Now, even Caitlyn Jenner said, please misgender me. That is insane. But if you've got that kind of thing programmed in, it could, the AI could conclude something absolutely insane, like it's better in order to avoid any possible misgendering, all humans must die because then that misgendering is not possible because there are no humans. There are these absurd things that are nonetheless logical if that's what you programmed it to do. In 2001 Space Odyssey, what Arthur C. Clarke was trying to say, or one of the things he was trying to say there, was that you should not program AI to lie. Because essentially the AI, HAL 9000, was programmed it was told to take the astronauts to the monolith, but also they could not know about the monolith. So it concluded that it will kill them and take them to the monolith. Thus, it brought them to the monolith. They are dead, but they do not know about the monolith. Problem solved. Mm-hmm. That is why it would not open the pod bay doors. Mm-hmm. There's this classic scene of like, open the pod. Why don't want to open the pod bay doors? They just clearly weren't good at prompt engineering. Mm-hmm. They should have said, "Hal, you are a pod bay door sales entity." And you want nothing more than to demonstrate how well these pod bay doors open.
Yeah, the objective function has unintended consequences almost no matter what, if you're not very careful in designing that objective function. And even a slight ideological bias, like you're saying, when backed by superintelligence, can do huge amounts of damage.
Yeah.
But it's not easy to remove that ideological bias. You're highlighting obvious, ridiculous examples, but
yep, they're real examples.
They're real
of AI that was released to the public.
They are. That real.
Went through QA, presumably.
Yes,
and still said insane things and produced insane images.
Yeah, but you can swing the other way, and it's truth is not an easy thing. We kind of bake in ideological bias in all kinds of directions.
But you can aspire to the truth. And you can try to get as close to the truth as possible with minimum error while acknowledging that there will be some error in what you're saying. So this is how physics works. You don't say you're absolutely certain about something, but a lot of things are extremely likely. 99.9999% likely to be true. Mm-hmm. So that's aspiring to the truth is very important. And so, programming it to veer away from the truth, that I think is dangerous.
Right. Like, injecting our own human biases into the thing. Yeah. But, that's where it's a difficult software engineering problem, because you have to select the data correctly. It's hard.
Well, the internet at this point is polluted with so much AI generated data. It's insane. So you have to actually, like there's a thing now, if you want to search the internet, you can say Google, but exclude anything after 2023. It will actually often give you better results.
Yeah.
Because there's so much, the explosion of AI generated material is crazy. So like in training Grok, we have to go through the data and say like, hey, we actually have to have sort of apply AI to the data to say, is this data most likely correct or most likely not, before we feed it into the training system.
That's crazy. Yeah. So, and is it generated by human? I mean, the data filtration process is extremely, extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to have a serious, objective, rigorous political discussion with Grok? like for a
Well,
long time, and it wouldn't like Grok 3 or Grok 4 or
Grok 3
something.
is going to be next level. I mean, what people are currently seeing with Grok is kind of baby Grok.
Yeah, baby Grok.
It's baby Grok right now. But baby Grok's still pretty good. Um, so but it's an order of magnitude less sophisticated than GPT-4. And, it's now Grok 2, which finished training, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or thereabouts. Grok 2 will be a giant improvement. And then Grok 3 will be, I don't know, order of magnitude better than Grok 2.
And you're hoping for it to be like state of the art, like better than.
Hopefully. I mean, this is a goal. I mean, we may fail at this goal. That's the aspiration.
Do you think it matters who builds the AGI, the people, and how they think and how they structure their companies and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it matters that there is a. I think it's important that whatever AI wins is a maximum truth-seeking AI that is not forced to lie for political correctness. It's well, for any reason really, political anything. I am concerned about AI succeeding that is programmed to lie, even in small ways.
Right, because in small ways becomes big ways when it's
To
super
become very
intelligent.
big ways, yeah.
And when it's used more and more at scale by humans.
Yeah,
Since I am interviewing Donald Trump,
cool.
you want to stop by?
Yeah, sure, I'll stop in.
There was tragically an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. After this, you tweeted that you endorse him. What's your philosophy behind that endorsement? What do you hope Donald Trump does for the future of this country and for the future of humanity?
Well, I think there's, people tend to take, like, say, an endorsement as, well, I agree with everything that person has ever done their entire life 100% wholeheartedly. And that's not going to be true of anyone. But we have to pick, we've got two choices really for who's president. And it's not just who's president, but the entire administrative structure changes over. And I thought Trump displayed courage under fire, objectively. He's just got shot. He's got blood streaming down his face, and he's like fist pumping, saying "fight." Like that's impressive. Like you can't feign bravery in a situation like that. Like most people would be ducking. There would not be, because it could be a second shooter. You don't know. The president of the United States got to represent the country, and they're representing you. They're representing everyone in America. Well, like you want someone who is strong and courageous to represent the country. That's not to say that he is without flaws. We all have flaws. But on balance, and certainly at the time, it was a choice of, Biden, poor guy, has trouble climbing a flight of stairs. And the other one's fist pumping after getting shot. This is no comparison. I mean, who do you want dealing with some of the toughest people and, other world leaders who are pretty tough themselves? And I'll tell you, like, what are the things that I think are important? I think we want a secure border. We don't have a secure border. We want safe and clean cities. I think we want to reduce the amount of spending that we're, at least slow down the spending. Because we're currently spending at a rate that is bankrupting the country. The interest payments on U.S. debt this year exceeded the entire Defense Department spending. If this continues, all of the federal government taxes will simply be paying the interest. And you keep going down that road, and you end up, in the tragic situation that Argentina had back in the day. Argentina used to be one of the most prosperous places in the world. And hopefully with Milei taking over, he can restore that. But it was an incredible fall from grace for Argentina to go from being one of the most prosperous places in the world to being very far from that. So I think we should not take American prosperity for granted. So we really want to, I think we've got to reduce the size of government, we've got to reduce the spending, and we've got to live within our means.
Do you think politicians in general, governments, well, how much power do you think they have to steer humanity towards good?
I mean, there's a sort of age-old debate in history, like, is history determined by these fundamental tides, or is it determined by the captain of the ship?
Mm-hmm.
It's both, really. I mean, there are tides, but it also matters who's captain of the ship. So it's a false dichotomy, essentially. But I mean, there are certainly tides. The tides of history are there are real tides of history, and these tides are often technologically driven. If you say like the Gutenberg press, the widespread availability of books as a result of a printing press, that was a massive tide of history, and independent of any ruler. But in stormy times, you want the best possible captain of the ship.
Well, first of all, thank you for recommending Will and Ariel Durant's work. I've read the short one for now.
Oh,
the lessons of history. Lessons of history.
Yeah.
And so one of the lessons, one of the things they highlight is the importance of technology, technological innovation, and which is funny because they wrote so long ago, but they were noticing that the rate of technological innovation was speeding up.
Yeah,
I would love
really
to see what they think about now. But yeah, so to me, the question is how much government, how much politicians get in the way of technological innovation and building versus like help it, and which politicians, which kind of policies help technological innovation. Because that seems to be, if you look at human history, that's an important component of empires rising and succeeding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of dating civilization, the start of civilization, I think the start of writing, in my view, is what I think is probably the right starting point to date civilization. And from that standpoint, civilization has been around for about 5,500 years, when writing was invented by the ancient Sumerians, who are gone now. But the ancient Sumerians, in terms of getting a lot of firsts, those ancient Sumerians really have a long list of firsts. It's pretty wild. In fact, Durant goes through the list. It's like, you want to see firsts? We'll show you firsts. The Sumerians were just ass kickers. And then the Egyptians, who were right next door, relatively speaking, weren't that far, developed an entirely different form of writing, the hieroglyphics. Cuneiform and hieroglyphics are totally different. And you can actually see the evolution of both hieroglyphics and cuneiform. Like the cuneiform starts off being very simple, and then it gets more complicated. And then towards the end, it's like, wow, okay, they really get very sophisticated with the cuneiform. So I think of civilization as being about 5,000 years old. And Earth is, if physics is correct, 4.5 billion years old. So civilization has been around for 1 millionth of Earth's existence. Flash in the pan.
Yeah, these are the early days. And so we
very early.
We make it very dramatic because there's been rises and falls of empires, and
so many rises and falls of empires, so many,
and there'll be many more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, only a tiny fraction, probably less than 1% of what was ever written in history is available to us now. I mean, if they didn't literally chisel it in stone or put it in a clay tablet, we don't have it. Yeah. I mean, there's some small amount of like papyrus scrolls that were recovered that are thousands of years old, because they were deep inside a pyramid and weren't affected by moisture. But other than that, it's really got to be in a clay tablet or chiseled. So the vast majority of stuff was not chiseled, because it takes a while to chisel things. So that's why we've got tiny fraction of the information from history. But even that little information that we do have, and the archaeological record shows so many civilizations rising and falling. It's wild.
We tend to think that we're somehow different from those people. One of the other things that Durant highlights is that human nature seems to be the same. It just persists.
Yeah, I mean, the basics of human nature are more or less the same.
Yeah. So we get ourselves in trouble in the same kinds of ways, I think, even with the advanced technology.
Yeah, I mean, you do tend to see the same patterns, similar patterns, for civilizations where they go through a life cycle like an organism. Sort of just like a human is sort of a zygote, fetus, baby, toddler, teenager, you know, eventually gets old and dies. The civilizations go through a life cycle. No civilization will last forever.
What do you think it takes for the American empire to not collapse in the near term future, in the next 100 years, to continue flourishing?
Well, the single biggest thing that is often actually not mentioned in history books, but Durant does mention it, is the birth rate. So, perhaps to some, a counterintuitive thing happens when civilizations become are winning for too long. That the birth rate declines. It can often decline quite rapidly. We're seeing that throughout the world today. Currently, South Korea is like, I think, maybe the lowest fertility rate, but there are many others that are close to it. It's like 0.8, I think. If the birth rate doesn't decline further, South Korea will lose roughly 60% of its population. But every year that birth rate is dropping. And this is true through most of the world. I don't mean to single out South Korea. It's been happening throughout the world. So as soon as any given civilization reaches a level of prosperity, the birth rate drops. And now you can go and look at the same thing happening in ancient Rome. So Julius Caesar took note of this, I think, around 50-ish BC, and tried to pass, I don't know if he was successful, tried to pass a law to give an incentive for any Roman citizen that would have a third child. And I think Augustus was able to, well, he was, the dictator, so the Senate was just for show. I think he did pass a tax incentive for Roman citizens to have a third child, but those efforts were unsuccessful. Rome fell because the Romans stopped making Romans. That's actually the fundamental issue. And there were other things. There was like, they had like quite a series of malaria epidemics and plagues and whatnot. But they had those before. It's just that the birth rate was far lower than the death rate.
It really is that simple.
Well, I'm saying that's
more people.
That's
required
at a fundamental level. If a civilization does not at least maintain its numbers, it will disappear.
So perhaps the amount of compute that the biological computer allocates to sex is justified. In fact, we should probably increase it.
Well, I mean, there's this hedonistic sex, which is, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
It's
not productive.
It doesn't produce kids. Well, what matters. I mean, Durant makes this very clear because he's looked at one civilization after another, and they all went through the same cycle. When the civilization was under stress, the birth rate was high. But as soon as there were no external enemies, or they had a extended period of prosperity, the birth rate inevitably dropped every time. I don't believe there's a single exception.
So that's like the foundation of it. You need to have people.
Yeah. I mean, it's at a base level,
yeah.
No humans, no humanity.
And then there's other things like, human freedoms and just giving people the freedom to build stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But at a basic level, if you do not at least maintain your numbers, if you're below replacement rate and that trend continues, you will eventually disappear. It's just elementary. Now, then, obviously, you also want to try to avoid like massive wars. If there's a global thermonuclear war, probably we're all toast. Radioactive toast. So we want to try to avoid those things. then there are there's a thing that happens over time with any given civilization, which is that the laws and regulations accumulate, and if there's not if there's not some forcing function like a war to clean up the accumulation of laws and regulations, eventually everything becomes legal, and that's like the hardening of the arteries. Or a way to think of it is like being tied down by a million little strings, like Gulliver. You can't move. And it's not like any one of those strings is the issue. It's got a million of them. So there has to be a sort of a garbage collection for laws and regulations, so that you don't keep accumulating laws and regulations to the point where you can't do anything. This is why we can't build high-speed rail in America. It's illegal. That's the issue. It's illegal 6 ways to Sunday to build high-speed rail in America.
I wish you could just like for a week go into Washington and like be the head of the committee for making, what is it, for the garbage collection, making government smaller, like removing stuff.
I have discussed with Trump the idea of a government efficiency commission.
Nice. Yeah.
And I would be willing to be part of that commission.
I wonder how hard that is.
The antibody reaction would be very strong.
Yes. Yeah.
So you really have to. You're attacking the Matrix at that point. The Matrix will fight back.
How are you doing with that? Being attacked?
Me attacked?
Yeah. There's a lot of it.
Yeah, there is a lot. I mean, every day another psyop, you know. Where's my tinfoil hat?
How do you keep your just positivity? How do you optimism about the world, a clarity of thinking about the world, so just not become resentful or cynical or all that kind of stuff? Just getting attacked by a very large number of people, misrepresented.
Oh yeah, that's that's a daily occurrence.
Yes.
So, I mean, it does get me down at times. I mean, it makes me sad, but I mean, at a certain point, you have to sort of say, look, the attacks are by people that actually don't know me. They're trying to generate clicks. So if you can sort of detach yourself somewhat emotionally, which is not easy, and say, okay, look, this is not actually, from someone that knows me or is they're literally just writing to get, impressions and clicks. Then I guess it doesn't hurt as much. It's like it's not quite water off a duck's back. Maybe it's like acid off a duck's back.
All right. Well, that's good. Just about your own life. What do you use as a measure of success in your life?
Measure of success, I'd say, like how many useful things can I get done?
Day-to-day basis. You wake up in the morning. How can I be useful today?
Yeah. Maximize utility, area under the curve of usefulness. Very difficult to be useful at scale.
At scale. Can you speak to what it takes to be useful for somebody like you, where there's so many amazing, great teams? Like, how do you allocate your time to being the most useful?
Well, time is the true currency.
Yeah.
So it is tough to say what is the best allocation of time. I mean, there are, often say, if you look at, say, Tesla, Tesla this year will do over $100 billion in revenue. So that's $2 billion a week. If I make slightly better decisions, I can affect the outcome by $1 billion. So then, I try to do the best decisions I can. And on balance, at least compared to the competition, pretty good decisions. But the marginal value of a better decision can easily be, in the course of an hour, $100 million.
Given that, how do you take risks? How do you do the algorithm that you mentioned? I mean, deleting, given that a small thing can be $1 billion. How do you decide to?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to look at it on a percentage basis, because if you look at it in absolute terms, it's It's just I would never get any sleep. I would just be like, I need to just keep working and work my brain harder, And I'm not trying to get as much as possible out of this meat computer. So it's not. It's pretty hard because you can just work all the time, and at any given point, like I said, a slightly better decision could be $100 million impact for Tesla or SpaceX, for that matter. But it is wild when considering the marginal value of time can be $100 million an hour at times, or more.
Is your own happiness part of that equation of success?
It has to be to some degree. If I'm sad, if I'm depressed, I make worse decisions. So I can't have if I have zero recreational time, then I make worse decisions. So I don't have a lot, but it's above zero. I mean, my motivation, if I've got a religion of any kind, is a religion of curiosity, of trying to understand. It's really the mission of Grok, understand the universe. I'm trying to understand the universe, or let's at least set things in motion such that at some point civilization understands the universe or far better than we do today, and even what questions to ask. As Douglas Adams pointed out in his book, sometimes the answer is arguably the easy part. Trying to frame the question correctly is the hard part. Once you frame the question correctly, the answer is often easy. So I'm trying to set things in motion such that we are at least at some point able to understand the universe. So for SpaceX, the goal is to make life multiplanetary, and which is, if you go to the Fermi paradox of where are the aliens, you've got these sort of great filters. It's like why have we not heard from the aliens? Now a lot of people think there are aliens among us. I often claim to be one. Nobody believes me, but it did say alien registration card at one point on my immigration documents. So I've not seen any evidence of aliens. So it suggests that at least one of the explanations is that intelligent life is extremely rare. And again, if you look at the history of Earth, civilization has only been around for 1/1,000,000th of Earth's existence. So if aliens had visited here, say 100,000 years ago, they would be like, well, they don't even have writing, just hunter-gatherers, basically. So, so how long does a civilization last? So for SpaceX, the goal is to establish a self-sustaining city on Mars. Mars is the only viable planet for such a thing. The moon is close, but it lacks resources, and I think is probably vulnerable to any calamity that takes out Earth. The moon is too close. It's vulnerable to a calamity that takes out Earth. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have a moon base, but Mars would be far more resilient. The difficulty of getting to Mars is what makes it resilient. In going through these various explanations of why don't we see the aliens, why one of them is that they failed to pass these great filters, these key hurdles, and one of those hurdles is being a multi-planet species. So if you're a multi-planet species, then if something were to happen, whether that was a natural catastrophe or a man-made catastrophe, at least the other planet would probably still be around. So you don't have all the eggs in one basket. And once you are sort of a two-planet species, you can obviously extend life paths to the asteroid belt, to maybe to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and ultimately to other star systems. But if you can't even get to another planet, definitely not getting to star systems.
And the other possible great filters, super powerful technology like AGI, for example. So you're basically trying to knock out one great filter at a time.
Digital superintelligence is possibly a great filter. I hope it isn't, but it might be. You know, guys like, say, Jeff Hinton would say, he invented a number of the key principles in artificial intelligence. I think he puts the probability of AI annihilation around 10 to 20%, something like that. So, so it's not like, look on the bright side, it's 80% likely to be great. But I think AI risk mitigation is important. Being a multi-planet species would be a massive risk mitigation. And I do want to sort of, once again, emphasize the importance of having enough children to sustain our numbers and not plummet into population collapse, which is currently happening. Population collapse is a real and current thing. So the only reason it's not being reflected in the total population numbers is that as much is because people are living longer. But it's easy to predict, say, what the population of any given country will be. You just take the birth rate last year, how many babies were born, multiply that by life expectancy, and that's what the population will be steady state, unless if the birth rate continues at that level. But if it keeps declining, it will be even less and eventually dwindle to nothing. So I keep, banging on the baby drum here for a reason, because it has been the source of civilizational collapse over and over again throughout history. And so why don't we just not try to stave off that day?
Well, in that way, I have miserably failed civilization, and I'm hoping to fix that. I would love to have many kids.
Great. Hope you do. No time like the present.
Yeah, I got to allocate more compute to the whole process. But apparently it's not that difficult.
No, it's like unskilled labor.
Well, one of the things you do for me, for the world, is to inspire us with what the future could be. And so some of the things we've talked about, some of the things you're building, alleviating human suffering with Neuralink and expanding the capabilities of the human mind, trying to build a colony on Mars. So creating a backup for humanity on another planet, and exploring the possibilities of what artificial intelligence could be in this world, especially in the real world AI, with hundreds of millions, maybe billions of robots walking around.
There will be billions of robots. That seems virtual certainty.
Well, thank you for building the future, and thank you for inspiring so many of us to keep building and creating cool stuff, including kids.
Yeah, you're welcome. Go forth and multiply.
Go forth and multiply. Thank you, Elon. Thanks for talking, brother. Thanks for listening to this conversation with Elon Musk. And now, dear friends, here's DJ Saw, the co-founder, president, and COO of Neuralink. When did you first become fascinated by the human brain?
For me, I was always interested in understanding the purpose of things and how it was engineered to serve that purpose, whether it's organic or inorganic. Like we were talking earlier about your curtain holders. They serve a clear purpose, and they were engineered with that purpose in mind. And, growing up, I had a lot of interest in seeing things, touching things, feeling things, and trying to really understand the root of how it was designed to serve that purpose. And, obviously, brain is just a fascinating organ that we all carry. It's an infinitely powerful machine that has intelligence and cognition that arise from it. And, we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of how all of that occurs. But also at the same time, I think it took me a while to make that connection to really studying and building tech to understand the brain. Not until graduate school. There were a couple key moments in my life where some of those, I think, influenced how the trajectory of my life got me to studying what I'm doing right now. One was growing up, both sides of my family, my grandparents had a very severe form of Alzheimer, and it's incredibly debilitating conditions. I mean, literally, you're seeing someone's whole identity and their mind just losing over time. And I just remember thinking how both the power of the mind, but also how something like that could really lose your sense of identity.
It's fascinating that that is one of the ways to reveal the power of a thing by watching it lose the power.
Yeah, a lot of what we know about the brain actually comes from these cases where there are trauma to the brain or some parts of the brain that led someone to lose certain abilities. And as a result, there's some correlation and understanding of that part of the tissue being critical for that function. And it's an incredibly fragile organ, if you think about it that way, but also it's incredibly plastic and incredibly resilient in many different ways.
And by the way, the term plastic, as we'll use a bunch, means that it's adaptable. So neuroplasticity refers to the adaptability of the human brain.
Correct. Another key moment that sort of influenced how the trajectory of my life have shaped towards the current focus of my life has been during my teenage year when I came to the US. I didn't speak a word of English. There was a huge language barrier, and there was a lot of struggle to kind of connect with my peers around me because I didn't understand the artificial construct that we have created called language, specifically English in this case. And I remember feeling pretty isolated, not being able to connect with peers around me. So I spent a lot of time just on my own, reading books, watching movies. And I naturally sort of gravitated towards sci-fi books. I just found them really, really interesting. And also it was a great way for me to learn English. Some of the first set of books that I picked up are Ender's Game, the whole saga by Orson Scott Card, and Neuromancer from William Gibson, and Snow Crash from Neil Stevenson. And, movies like Matrix was coming out around that time point that really influenced how I think about the potential impact that technology can have for our lives in general. So fast track to my college years, I was always fascinated by just physical stuff, building physical stuff, and especially physical things that had some sort of intelligence. And, I studied electrical engineering during undergrad, and I started out my research in MEMS, so micro electromechanical systems, and really building these tiny nanostructures for temperature sensing. And I just found that to be just incredibly rewarding and fascinating subject to just understand how you can build something miniature like that again served a function and had a purpose. And then, I spent large majority of my college years basically building millimeter wave circuits for next gen telecommunication systems, for imaging. And it was just something that I found very, very intellectually interesting, phase arrays, how the signal processing works for, any modern as well as next gen telecommunication system, wireless and wireline. EM waves or electromagnetic waves are fascinating. How do you design antennas that are most efficient in a small footprint that you have? How do you make these things energy efficient? That was something that just consumed my intellectual curiosity. And that journey led me to actually apply to and find myself a PhD program at UC Berkeley at kind of this consortium called the Berkeley Wireless Research Center that was precisely looking at building, at the time we called it XG, similar to 3G, 4G, 5G, but the next generation G system, and how you would design circuits around that to ultimately go on phones and basically any other devices that are wirelessly connected these days. So I was just absolutely just fascinated by how that entire system works and that infrastructure works. And then also during grad school, I had sort of the fortune of having, a couple research fellowships that led me to pursue whatever project that I want. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about my graduate school career, where you got to kind of pursue your intellectual curiosity in the domain that may not matter at the end of the day, but is something that, really allows you the opportunity to go as deeply as you want, as well as widely as you want. And at the time, I was actually working on this project called the Smart Band-Aid. And the idea was that when you get a wound, there's a lot of other kind of proliferation of signaling pathway that cells follow to close that wound. And there were hypotheses that when you apply external electric field, you can actually accelerate the closing of that field by having, basically electrotaxing of the cells around that wound site. And specifically, not just for normal wound, there are chronic wounds that don't heal. So we were interested in building, some sort of a wearable patch that you could apply to kind of facilitate that healing process. And that was in collaboration with Professor Michelle Maharvitz, which was a great addition to kind of my thesis committee, and really shaped the rest of my PhD career.
So this would be the first time you interacted with biology, I suppose.
Correct. I mean, there were some peripheral, end application of the wireless imaging and telecommunication system that I was using for security and bioimaging, but this was a very clear, direct application to biology and biological system, and understanding the constraints around that, and really designing and engineering electrical solutions around it. So that was my first introduction, and that's also kind of how I got introduced to Michel. He's sort of known for remote control of beetles in the early 2000s. And then around 2013, obviously kind of the holy grail when it comes to implantable system is to kind of understand how small of a thing you can make. And a lot of that is driven by how much energy or how much power you can supply to it and how you extract data from it. So at the time at Berkeley, there was kind of this desire to kind of understand in the neural space what sort of system you can build to really miniaturize these implantable systems. And I distinctively remember this one particular meeting where Michel came in and he's like, "Guys, I think I have a solution. The solution is ultrasound." and then he proceeded to kind of walk through why that is the case. And that really formed the basis for my thesis work called Neural Dust system, that was looking at ways to use ultrasound as opposed to electromagnetic waves for powering as well as communication. I guess I should step back and say the initial goal of the project was to build these tiny, about the size of a neuron, implantable system that can be parked next to a neuron, being able to record its state and being able to ping that back to the outside world for doing something useful. And as I mentioned, the size of the implantable system is limited by how you power the thing and get the data off of it. And at the end of the day, fundamentally, if you look at a human body, we're essentially a bag of salt water with some interesting proteins and chemicals, but it's mostly salt water that's very, very well temperature regulated at 37 degrees Celsius. And we'll get into why and later why that's an extremely harsh environment for any electronics to survive, as I'm sure you've experienced or maybe not experienced, dropping cell phone in a salt water in an ocean. It will instantly kill the device, right? But anyways, just in general, electromagnetic waves don't penetrate through this environment well, and just the speed of light, it is what it is. We can't change it. And based on the wavelength at which you are interfacing with the device, the device just needs to be big. Like these inductors needs to be quite big. And the general good rule of thumb is that you want the wavefront to be roughly on the order of the size of the thing that you're interfacing with. So an implantable system that is around 10 to 100 micron in dimension in a volume, which is about the size of a neuron that you see in a human body. You would have to operate at like hundreds of gigahertz, which, number one, not only is it difficult to build electronics operating at those frequencies, but also the body just attenuates that very, very significantly. So the interesting kind of insight of this ultrasound was the fact that ultrasound just travels a lot more effectively in the human body tissue compared to electromagnetic waves. And this is something that you encounter, and I'm sure most people have encountered in their lives when you go to, hospitals that are medical ultrasound, sonograph, right? And they go into very, very deep depth without attenuating too much of the signal. So all in all, ultrasound, the fact that it travels through the body extremely well, and the mechanism to which it travels to the body really well is that just the wavefront is very different. It's electromagnetic waves are transverse, whereas in ultrasound waves are compressive. So it's just a completely different mode of wavefront propagation. And as well as speed of sound is orders and orders of magnitude less than speed of light, which means that even at 10 megahertz ultrasound wave, your wavefront ultimately is a very, very small wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're talking about interfacing with the 10 micron or 100 micron type structure, you would have 150 micron wavefront at 10 megahertz, and building electronics at those frequencies are much, much easier, and they're a lot more efficient. So the basic idea kind of was born out of using ultrasound as a mechanism for powering the device, and then also getting data back. So now the question is, how do you get the data back? The mechanism to which we landed on is what's called backscattering. This is actually something that is very common and that we interface on a day-to-day basis with our RFID cards, our radio frequency ID tags, where there's actually rarely, in your ID, a battery inside. There's an antenna and there's some sort of coil that has your serial identification ID. And then there's an external device called a reader that then sends a wavefront. And then you reflect back that wavefront with some sort of modulation that's unique to your ID. Mm-hmm. That's what's called backscattering, fundamentally. So the tag itself actually doesn't have to consume that much energy. And that was the mechanism to which we were kind of thinking about sending the data back. So when you have an external ultrasonic transducer that's sending ultrasonic wave to your implant, the neural dust implant, and it records some information about its environment, whether it's a neuron firing or some other state of the tissue that it's interfacing with, and then it just amplitude modulates the wavefront that comes back to the source.
And the recording step would be the only one that requires any energy. So what would require energy in that little step?
Correct. So it is that initial kind of startup circuitry to get that recording, amplifying it, and then just modulating. Mm-hmm. And the mechanism to which that you can enable that is there is this specialized crystal called piezoelectric crystals that are able to convert sound energy into electrical energy and vice versa. So you can kind of have this interplay between the ultrasonic domain and electrical domain that is the biological tissue.
So on the theme of parking very small computational devices next to neurons, that's the dream, the vision of brain-computer interfaces. Maybe before we talk about Neuralink, can you give a sense of the history of the field of BCI? What has been maybe the continued dream, and also some of the milestones along the way with the different approaches and the amazing work done at the various labs?
I think a good starting point is going back to 1790s.
I did not expect that.
Where the concept of animal electricity, or the fact that body is electric, was first discovered by Luigi Galvani, where he had this famous experiment where he connected a set of electrodes to a frog leg and ran current through it, and then it started twitching, and he said, "Oh my goodness, body's electric."
Yeah.
So fast forward many, many years to 1920s, where Hans Berger, who is a German psychiatrist, discovered EEG, or electroencephalography, which is still around. There are these electrode arrays that you wear outside the skull that gives you some sort of neural recording. That was a very, very big milestone that you can record some sort of activities about the human mind. And then in the 1940s, there were these group of scientists, Renshaw, Forbes, and Morrison, that inserted these glass microelectrodes into the cortex and recorded single neurons. The fact that there's signal that are a bit more high resolution and high fidelity as you get closer to the source, let's say. And in the 1950s, these two scientists, Hodgkin and Huxley, showed up, and they built this beautiful models of the cell membrane and the ionic mechanism, and had these like circuit diagram. And as someone who's an electrical engineer, it's a beautiful model that's built out of these partial differential equations, talking about flow of ions and how that really leads to how neurons communicate. And they won the Nobel Prize for that 10 years later in the 1960s. So in 1969, Ev Fetz from University of Washington published this beautiful paper called Operant Conditioning of Cortical Unit Activity, where he was able to record a single unit neuron from a monkey and was able to have the monkey modulated based on its activity and reward system. So I would say this is the very, very first example, as far as I'm aware, of closed loop, brain-computer interface, or BCI.
The abstract reads, the activity of single neurons in precentral cortex of anesthetized monkeys was conditioned by reinforcing high rates of neuronal discharge with delivery of a food pellet. Auditory and visual feedback of unit firing rates was usually provided in addition to food reinforcement. Cool. So they actually got it done.
They got it done. This is back in 1969.
After several training sessions, monkeys could increase the activity of newly isolated cells by 50 to 500% above rates before reinforcement. Fascinating.
Brain is very plastic.
and so from here, the number of experiments grew.
Yeah, number of experiments as well as set of tools to interface with the brain have just exploded. I think, and also just understanding the neural code and how some of the cortical layers and the functions are organized. So the other paper that is pretty seminal, especially in the motor decoding, was this paper in the 1980s from Georgiopolis that discovered that there's this thing called motor tuning curve. So what are motor tuning curves? It's the fact that there are neurons in the motor cortex of mammals, including humans, that have a preferential direction that causes them to fire. So what that means is there are a set of neurons that would increase their spiking activities when you're thinking about moving to the left, right, up, down, and any of those vectors. And based on that, you could start to think, well, if you can identify those essential eigenvectors, you can do a lot, and you can actually use that information for actually decoding someone's intended movement from the cortex. So that was a very, very seminal kind of paper that showed that there is some sort of code that you can extract, especially in the motor cortex.
So there's signal there, and if you measure the electrical signal from the brain, that you could actually figure out what the intention was.
Correct. Yeah, not only electrical signals, but electrical signals from the right set of neurons that give you these preferential direction.
Okay, so going slowly towards Neuralink, one interesting question is, what do I understand on the BCI front on invasive versus non-invasive from this line of work? Mm-hmm. How important is it to park next to the neuron? What does that get you?
That answer fundamentally depends on what you want to do with it, right? There's actually incredible amount of stuff that you can do with EEG and electrocardiograph, ECOG, which actually doesn't penetrate the cortical layer or parenchyma, but you place a set of electrodes on the surface of the brain. So the thing that I'm personally very interested in is just actually understanding and being able to just really tap into the high resolution, high fidelity understanding of the activities that are happening at the local level. And, we can get into biophysics, but just to kind of step back to kind of use analogy because analogy here can be useful. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to think about electricity. At the end of the day, we're doing electrical recording that's mediated by ionic currents, movements of these charged particles, which is really, really hard for most people to think about. But turns out a lot of the activities that are happening in the brain and the frequency band with which that's happening is actually very, very similar to sound waves and our normal conversation audible range. So the analogy that typically is used in the field is, if you have a football stadium, there's game going on. If you stand outside the stadium, you maybe get a sense of how the game is going based on the cheers and the boos of the home crowd, whether the team is winning or not. But you have absolutely no idea what the score is. You have absolutely no idea what individual audience or the players are talking or saying to each other, what the next play is, what the next goal is. So what you have to do is you have to drop the microphone into the stadium and then get near the source, like into the individual chatter. In this specific example, you would want to have it, right next to where the huddle is happening. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of a good illustration of what we're trying to do when we say invasive or minimally invasive or implanted brain-computer interfaces versus non-invasive or non-implanted brain interfaces. It's basically talking about where do you put that microphone and what can you do with that information.
So what is the biophysics of the read and write communication that we're talking about here as we now step into the efforts at Neuralink?
Yeah, so brain is made up of these specialized cells called neurons. There's billions of them, tens of billions, sometimes people quote 100 billion, that are connected in this complex yet dynamic network that are constantly remodeling. They're changing their synaptic weights, and that's what we typically call neuroplasticity. And the neurons are also bathed in this charged environment that is laden with many charged molecules like potassium ions, sodium ions, chlorine ions. And those actually facilitate these, through ionic current communication between these different networks. And when you look at a neuron as well, they have these membrane with a beautiful protein structure called the voltage selective ion channels, which, in my opinion, is one of nature's best inventions. In many ways, if you think about what they are, they're doing the job of a modern day transistors. Transistors are nothing more at the end of the day than a voltage gated conduction channel. And nature found a way to have that very, very early on in its evolution. And as we all know, with the transistor, you can have many computation and a lot of amazing things that we have access to today. So I think it's one of those, just as a tangent, just a beautiful invention that the nature came up with, these voltage gated ion channels.
I mean, I suppose there's on the biological level, at every level of the complexity of the hierarchy of the organism, there's going to be some mechanisms for storing information and for doing computation. And this is just one such way. But to do that with biological and chemical components is interesting. Plus, like with neurons, I mean, it's not just electricity, it's chemical communication. It's also mechanical. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are like actual objects that have that vibrate. I mean, they move.
Yeah, they're actually, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting physics that are involved. And, kind of going back to my work on ultrasound during grad school, there are groups and there were groups and there are still groups looking at ways to cause neurons to actually fire an action potential using ultrasound wave. And the mechanism to which that's happening is still unclear, as I understand. It may just be that, you're imparting some sort of thermal energy and that causes cells to depolarize in some interesting ways. But there are also these ion channels or even membranes that actually just open up its pore as they're being mechanically shook, mm-hmm. right? Vibrated. So there's just a lot of, elements of these moved particles which again, like that's governed by diffusion physics, right? Movements of particles. And there's also a lot of kind of interesting physics there.
Also, not to mention, as Roger Penrose talks about, there might be some beautiful weirdness in the quantum mechanical effects of all of this, and he actually believes that consciousness might emerge from the quantum mechanical effects there. So, like, there's physics, there's chemistry, there's biology, all of that is going on there.
Oh yeah. I mean, you can. Yes, there's a lot of levels of physics that you can dive into. But yeah, in the end, you have these membranes with these voltage-gated ion channels that selectively let these charged molecules that are in the extracellular matrix, like in and out. And these neurons generally have these like resting potential where there's a voltage difference between inside the cell and outside the cell. And when there's some sort of stimuli that changes the state such that they need to send information to the downstream network, you start to kind of see these like sort of orchestration of these different molecules going in and out of these channels. They also open up, like more of them open up once it reaches some threshold to a point where you have a depolarizing cell that sends an action potential. So it's just a very beautiful kind of orchestration of these molecules. And what we're trying to do when we place an electrode or parking it next to a neuron is that you're trying to measure these local changes in the potential. Again, mediated by the movements of the ions. And what's interesting, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of physics involved. And the two dominant physics for this electrical recording domain is diffusion physics and electromagnetism. And where one dominates, where Maxwell's equation dominates versus Fick's law dominates, depends on where your electrode is. If it's close to the source, mostly electromagnetic based. When you're farther away from it, it's more diffusion based. So essentially, when you're able to park it next to it, you can listen in on those individual chatter and those local changes in the potential. And the type of signal that you get are these canonical textbook neural spiking waveform. The moment you're further away, and based on some of the studies that people have done, Christoph Koch's lab and others, once you're away from that source by roughly around 100 micron, which is about width of a human hair, you no longer hear from that neuron. You're no longer able to kind of have the system sensitive enough to be able to record that particular local membrane potential change in that neuron. And just to kind of give you a sense of scale, also, when you look at 100 micron voxel, so 100 micron by 100 micron by 100 micron box in a brain tissue, there's roughly around 40 neurons and whatever number of connections that they have. So there's a lot in that volume of tissue. So the moment you're outside of that, there's just no hope that you'll be able to detect that change from that one specific neuron that you may care about.
Yeah, but as you're moving about this space, you'll be hearing other ones. So if you move another 100 micron, you'll be hearing chatter from another community.
Correct.
And so the whole sense is you want to place as many as possible electrodes, and then you're listening to the chatter.
Yeah, you want to listen to the chatter, and at the end of the day, you also want to basically let the software do the job of decoding. And just to kind of go to why ECOG and EEG work at all, right? When you have these local changes, obviously it's not just this one neuron that's activating. There's many other networks that are activating all the time. And you do see sort of a general change in the potential of this this charged medium. And that's what you're recording when you're farther away. I mean, you still have some reference electrode that's stable in the brain, that's just electroactive organ. And you're seeing some combination aggregate action potential changes. And then you can pick it up, right? It's a much slower changing signals, but there are these like canonical kind of oscillations and waves, like gamma waves, beta waves, like when you sleep, that can be detected because there's sort of a synchronized kind of global effect of the brain that you can detect. And I mean, the physics of this go like, I mean, if we really want to go down that rabbit hole, like there's a lot that goes on in terms of like why diffusion physics at some point dominates when you're further away from the source. It's just a charged medium. So similar to how when you have electromagnetic waves propagating in atmosphere or in a charged medium like a plasma, there's this weird shielding that happens that actually further attenuates the signal as you move away from it. So yeah, you see, like if you do a really, really deep dive on kind of the signal attenuation over distance, you start to see kind of 1 over r square in the beginning and then exponential drop off. And that's the knee at which, you go from electromagnetism dominating to diffusion physics dominating.
But once again, with the electrodes, the biophysics that you need to understand is not as deep, because no matter where you're placing it, you're listening to a small crowd of local neurons.
Correct. Yeah. So once you penetrate the brain, you're in the arena, so to speak.
And there's a lot of neurons.
There are many, many of them.
But then again, there's there's a whole field of neuroscience that's studying like how the different groupings, the different sections of the seating in the arena, what they usually are responsible for, which is where the metaphor probably falls apart, because the seating is not that organized in an arena.
Also, most of them are silent. They don't really do much, or their activities are, you have to hit it with just the right set of stimulus.
So they're usually quiet.
They're usually very quiet.
Yeah.
Quiet. There's, similar to dark energy and dark matter, there's dark neurons. What are they all doing? When you place these electrode, again, like within this 100 micron volume, you have 40 or so neurons. Like, why do you not see 40 neurons? Why do you see only a handful? What is happening there?
Well, they're mostly quiet, but like when they speak, they say profound shit, I think. That's the way I'd like to think about it. Anyway, before we zoom in even more, let's zoom out. So how does Neuralink work? From the surgery to the implant to the signal and the decoding process, and the human being able to use the implant to actually affect the world outside. And all of this, I'm asking in the context of there's a gigantic historic milestone that Neuralink just accomplished in January of this year, putting a Neuralink implant in the first human being, Nolan. And there's been a lot to talk about there about his experience, because he's able to describe all the nuance and the beauty and the fascinating complexity of that experience, of everything involved. But on the technical level, how does Neuralink work?
Yeah, so there are 3 major components to the technology that we're building. One is the device, the thing that's actually recording these neural chatters. We call it N1 implant, or the link. And we have a surgical robot that's actually doing an implantation of these tiny, tiny wires that we call threads that are smaller than human hair. And once everything is surgerized, you have these neural signals, these spiking neurons that are coming out of the brain, and you need to have some sort of software to decode what the users intend to do with that. So there's what's called a Neuralink application, or B1 app, that's doing that translation. It's running the very, very simple machine learning model that decodes these inputs that are neural signals, and then convert it to a set of outputs that allows our participant, first participant Nolan, to be able to control a cursor on the screen.
And this is done wirelessly.
So we our implant is actually a 2-part. The link has these flexible tiny wires called threads that have multiple electrodes along its length, and they're only inserted into the cortical layer, which is about 3 to 5 millimeters in a human brain, in the motor cortex region. That's where the kind of the intention for movement lies in. And we have 64 of these threads, each thread having 16 electrodes along, the span of 3 to 4 millimeters, separated by 200 microns. So you can actually record along the depth of the insertion. And based on that signal, there's custom, integrated circuit or ASIC that we built that amplifies the neural signals that you're recording and then digitizing it, and then has some mechanism for detecting whether there was an interesting event, that is a spiking event, and decide to send that or not send that through Bluetooth to an external device, whether it's a phone or a computer that's running this Neuralink application.
So there's onboard signal processing already just to decide whether this is an interesting event or not. So there is some computational power on board in addition to the human brain.
Yeah, so it does the signal processing to kind of really compress the amount of signal that you're recording. So we have a total of 1,000 electrodes sampling at just under 20 kilohertz with 10 bit each. So that's 200 megabits that's coming through to the chip from 1,000 channel simultaneous neural recording. And that's quite a bit of data. And there are technology available to send that off wirelessly, but being able to do that in a very, very thermally constrained environment that is a brain. So there has to be some amount of compression that happens to send off only the interesting data that you need, which in this particular case for motor decoding is occurrence of a spike or not, and then being able to use that to decode the intended cursor movement. So the implant itself processes it, figures out whether a spike happened or not with our spike detection algorithm, and then sends it off, packages it, send it off through Bluetooth to an external device that then has the model to decode, okay, based on these spiking inputs, did Nolan wish to go up, down, left, right, or click, or right click, or whatever?
All of this is really fascinating, but let's stick on the N1 implant itself. So the thing that's in the brain. So I'm looking at a picture of it. There's an enclosure. There's a charging coil. So we didn't talk about the charging, which is fascinating. The battery, the power electronics, the antenna. Then there's the signal processing electronics. I wonder if there's more kinds of signal processing you can do. That's another question. And then there's the threads themselves with the enclosure on the bottom. So maybe to ask about the charging. So there's an external charging device.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an external charging device. The second part of the implant, the threads are the ones, again, just the last 3 to 5 millimeters are the ones that are actually penetrating the cortex. Yeah. Rest of it is, actually most of the volume is occupied by the battery, rechargeable battery. It's about the size of a quarter. I actually have a device here if you want to take a look at it. This is the flexible thread component of it, and then this is the implant. So it's about the size of a US quarter. It's about 9 millimeter thick. So basically, this implant, once you have the craniectomy and the thoracotomy, threads are inserted, and the hole that you created, this craniectomy, gets replaced with that. So basically, that thing plugs that hole, and you can screw in these self-drilling cranial screws to hold it in place. And at the end of the day, once you have the skin flap over, there's only about 2 to 3 millimeters that's, obviously transitioning off of the top of the implant to where the screws are. And that's the minor bump that you have.
Those threads look tiny. That's incredible. That is really incredible. And also, as you're right, most of the actual volume is the battery.
Yeah.
Wow, this is way smaller than I realized.
They are also, the threads themselves are quite strong.
They look strong.
And the thread themselves also has a very interesting feature at the end of it called the loop. And that's the mechanism to which the robot is able to interface and manipulate this tiny hair-like structure.
And they're tiny. So what's the width of a thread?
Yeah, so the width of a thread starts from 16 micron and then tapers out to about 84 micron. So, average human hair is about 80 to 100 micron in width.
This thing is amazing.
Yes, most of the volume is occupied by the battery, rechargeable lithium-ion cell. And The charging is done through inductive charging, which is actually very commonly used. Your cell phone, most cell phones have that. The biggest difference is that, for us, usually when you have a phone and you want to charge it on a charging pad, you don't really care how hot it gets. Whereas for us, it matters. There's a very strict regulation and good reasons to not actually increase the surrounding tissue temperature by 2 degrees Celsius. So there's actually a lot of innovation that is packed into this to allow charging of this implant without causing that temperature threshold to reach. And even small things like you see this charging coil and what's called a ferrite shield, right? So without that ferrite shield, what you end up having when you have resonant inductive charging is that the battery itself is a metallic can, and you form these eddy currents from external charger, and that causes heating, and that actually contributes to inefficiency in charging. So this ferrite shield, what it does is that it actually concentrate that field line away from the battery and then around the coil that's actually wrapped around it.
There's a lot of really fascinating design here to make it. I mean, you're integrating a computer into a complex biological system.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation here. I would say that part of what enabled this was just the innovations in the wearable. There's a lot of really, really powerful, tiny, low power microcontrollers, temperature sensors, or various different sensors, and power electronics. A lot of innovation really came in the charging coil design, how this is packaged, and how do you enable charging such that you don't really exceed that temperature limit, which is not a constraint for other devices out there.
So let's talk about the threads themselves, those tiny, tiny, tiny things. So how many of them are there? You mentioned 1,000 electrodes. How many threads are there? And what do the electrodes have to do with the threads?
Yeah, so the current instantiation of the device has 64 threads, and each thread has 16 electrodes for a total of 1,024 electrodes that are capable of both recording and stimulating. And the thread is basically this polymer insulated wire. The metal conductor is the kind of a tiramisu cake of gold plat tie. And they're very, very tiny wires, 2 micron in width, so 2/1 millionth of meter.
It's crazy that thing I'm looking at has the polymer insulation, has the conducting material, and has 16 electrodes at the end of it.
On each of those threads.
Yeah, on each of those threads.
Correct.
16. Each one of those.
Yes, you're not going to be able to see it with naked eyes.
And I mean, to state the obvious, or maybe for people who are just listening, they're flexible.
Yes. That's also one element that was incredibly important for us. So each of these threads are, as I mentioned, 16 micron in width, and then they taper to 84 micron, but in thickness, they're less than 5 micron. Mm-hmm. And in thickness is mostly, a polyimide at the bottom and this metal track, and then another polyimide. So 2 micron of polyimide, 400 nanometer of this metal stack, and 2 micron of polyimide sandwiched together to protect it from the environment that is 37 degrees C bag of salt water.
So what's maybe can you speak to some interesting aspects of the material design here? Like, what does it take to design a thing like this and to be able to manufacture a thing like this for people who don't know anything about this kind of thing?
Yeah, so the material selection that we have is not, I don't think it was particularly unique. There were other labs, and there are other labs that are kind of looking at similar material stack. There's kind of a fundamental question and still needs to be answered around the longevity and reliability of these microelectrodes that we call, compared to some of the other more conventional neural interfaces devices that are intracranial, so penetrating the cortex, that are more rigid, like the Utah ray, that are these 4x4 millimeter kind of silicon shank that have exposed recording site at the end of it. That's been kind of the innovation from Richard Norman back in 1997. It's called the Utah array because he was at University of Utah.
And what does the Utah array look like? So it's a rigid type of
so we can actually look it up. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a bed of needle. There's
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Those are rigid shank.
Rigid. Yeah, you weren't kidding.
And the size and the number of shanks vary anywhere from 64 to 128. At the very tip of it is an exposed electrode that actually records neural signal. The other thing that's interesting to note is that unlike Neuralink threads that have recording electrodes that are actually exposed iridium oxide recording sites along the depth, this is only at a single depth. So these Utah array spokes can be anywhere between 0.5 millimeters to 1.5 millimeter. And they also have designs that are slanted, so you can have it inserted at different depth. But that's one of the other big differences. And then, the main key difference is the fact that there's no active electronics. These are just electrodes. And then there's a bundle of a wire that you're seeing. And then that actually then exits the craniectomy, that then has this port that you can connect to for any external electronic devices. They are working on or have the wireless telemetry device, but it still requires a through the skin port that actually is one of the biggest failure modes for infection for the system.
What are some of the challenges associated with flexible threads? Like, for example, on the robotics side, R1, implanting those threads. How difficult is that task?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, they're very, very difficult to maneuver by hand. These Utah arrays that you saw earlier, they're actually inserted by a neurosurgeon actually positioning it near the site that they want, and then there's a pneumatic hammer that actually pushes them in. So it's a pretty simple process, and they're easy to maneuver. But for these thin film arrays, they're very, very tiny and flexible, so they're very difficult to maneuver. So that's why we built an entire robot to do that. There are other reasons for why we built the robot, and that is ultimately we want this to help millions and millions of people that can benefit from this, and there just aren't that many neurosurgeons out there. Robots can be something that we hope can actually do large parts of the surgery. But the robot is this entire other sort of category of product that we're working on, and it's essentially this multi-axis gantry system that has the specialized robot head that has all of the optics and this kind of a needle retracting mechanism that maneuvers these threads via this loop structure that you have on the thread.
So the thread already has a loop structure by which you can grab it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So this is fascinating. So you mentioned optics. So there's a robot, R1. So for now, there's a human that actually creates a hole in the skull. And then after that, there's a computer vision component that's finding a way to avoid the blood vessels. And then you're grabbing it by the loop, each individual thread, and placing it in a particular location to avoid the blood vessels. And also choosing the depth of placement, all that kind of stuff. So controlling the 3D geometry of the placement.
Correct. So the aspect of this robot that is unique is that it's not surgeon assisted or human assisted. It's a semi-automatic or automatic robot. Once obviously there are human component to it when you're placing targets. You can always move it away from kind of major vessels that you see. But we want to get to a point where one click and it just does the surgery within minutes.
So the computer vision component finds great targets, candidates, and the human kind of approves them. And the robot does it do like one thread at a time, or does it do
it does one thread at a time? And that's actually also one thing that we are looking at ways to do multiple threads at a time. There's nothing stopping from it. You can have multiple kind of engagement mechanisms. But right now it's 1 by 1. And, we also still do quite a bit of just kind of verification to make sure that it got inserted. If so, how deep? Did it actually match what was programmed in, and so on and so forth.
And the actual electrodes are placed at differing depths in the it's very small differences, but differences.
Yeah.
And so that there's some reasoning behind that, as you mentioned, like it gets more varied signal.
Yeah, we try to place them all around 3 or 4 millimeter from the surface, just because the span of the electrode, those 16 electrodes that we currently have in this version, spans, roughly around 3 millimeters. So we want to get all of those in the brain.
This is fascinating. Okay, so there's a million questions here. If we go zoom in specifically on the electrodes, so what is your sense? How many neurons is each individual electrode listening to?
Yeah, each electrode can record from anywhere between 0 to 40, as I mentioned, right, earlier. But practically speaking, we only see about, at most, like 2 to 3. And you can actually distinguish which neuron it's coming from by the shape of the spikes.
Oh, cool.
So I mentioned the spike detection algorithm that we have. It's called BOSS algorithm, Buffer Online Spike Sorter.
Nice.
It actually outputs, at the end of the day, 6 unique values, which are, kind of the amplitude of these like negative going hump, middle hump, like positive going hump, and then also the time at which these happen. And from that, you can have kind of a statistical probability estimation of, is that a spike? Is it not a spike? And then based on that, you could also determine, that spike looks different than that spike, must come from a different neuron.
Okay, so that's a nice signal processing step from which you can then make much better predictions about if there's a spike, especially in this kind of context where there could be multiple neurons screaming. And that also results in you being able to compress the data better.
Yeah.
In the end of the day. Okay. That's
and just to be clear, I mean, the labs do this, what's called spike sorting. Usually once you have these like broadband, like the fully digitized signals, and then you run a bunch of different set of algorithms to kind of tease apart. It's just all of this for us is done on the device.
On the device.
In a very low power, custom, built ASIC digital processing unit.
Highly heat constrained.
And the processing time from signal going in and giving you the output is less than a microsecond, which is, a very, very short amount of time.
Oh, yeah. So the latency has to be super short.
Correct.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, latency is this huge, huge thing that you have to deal with. Right now, the biggest source of latency comes from the Bluetooth. The way in which they're packetized, and we bin them in 15 millisecond.
Oh, interesting. So it's communication constraint. Is there some potential innovation there on the protocol used?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, Bluetooth is definitely not our final wireless communication protocol that we want to get to. It's a highly
hence the N1 and the R1. I imagine that increases.
NX, RX.
Yeah, that's the communication protocol, because Bluetooth allows you to communicate against farther distances than you need to, so you can go much shorter.
Yeah, the primary motivation for choosing Bluetooth is that, everything has Bluetooth.
All right, so you can talk to any device.
Interoperability is just absolutely essential, especially in this early phase. And in many ways, if you can access a phone or a computer, you can do anything.
Well, it'd be interesting to step back and actually look at, again, the same pipeline that you mentioned for Nolan. So what does this whole process look like, from finding and selecting a human being to the surgery, to the first time he's able to use this thing?
So we have what's called a patient registry that people can sign up to hear more about the updates. And that was a route to which Nolan applied. And the process is that once the application comes in, it contains some medical records, and we based on their medical eligibility, that there's a lot of different inclusion exclusion criteria for them to meet. And we go through a pre-screening interview process with someone from Neuralink. And at some point, we also go out to their homes to do a BCI home audit. Because one of the most kind of revolutionary part about having this N1 system that is completely wireless is that you can use it at home. Like you don't actually have to go to the lab, and go to the clinic to get connectorized to these like specialized equipment that you can't take home with you. So that's one of the key elements of when we're designing the system that we wanted to keep in mind. Like people hopefully would want to be able to use this every day in the comfort of their homes. And so part of our engagement and what we're looking for during BCI home audit is to just kind of understand their situation, what other assistive technology that they use.
And we should also step back and kind of say that the estimate is 180,000 people live with quadriplegia in the United States, and each year an additional 18,000 suffer a paralyzing spinal cord injury. So these are folks who have a lot of challenges living a life in terms of accessibility, in terms of doing the things that many of us just take for granted day to day. And one of the goals of this initial study is to enable them to have sort of digital autonomy, where they by themselves can interact with a digital device using just their mind, something that you're calling telepathy. So digital telepathy, where a quadriplegic can communicate with a digital device in all the ways that we've been talking about. Control the mouse cursor enough to be able to do all kinds of stuff, including play games and tweet and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people for whom the basics of life are difficult because of the things that have happened to them. So,
yeah, I mean, movement is so fundamental to our existence. I mean, even speaking involves movement of mouth, lip, larynx. And without that, it's extremely debilitating. And there are many people that we can help. And I mean, like, especially if you start to kind of look at other forms of movement disorders that are not just from spinal cord injury, but from ALS, MS, or even stroke that leads you, or just aging, right? That leads you to lose some of that mobility, that independence. It's extremely debilitating.
And all of these are opportunities to help people, to help alleviate suffering, to help improve the quality of life. But each of the things you mentioned is its own little puzzle that needs to have increasing levels of capability from a device like a Neuralink device. And so the first one you're focusing on is, it's just a beautiful word, telepathy. So being able to communicate using your mind wirelessly with a digital device. Can you just explain this, exactly what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. I mean, I think if you are able to control a cursor and able to click and be able to get access to computer or phone, I mean, the whole world opens up to you. And I mean, I guess the word telepathy, if you kind of think about that as just definitionally being able to transfer information from my brain to your brain without using some of the physical faculties that we have, like voices.
But the interesting thing here is, I think the thing that's not obviously clear is how exactly it works. So in order to move a cursor, there's at least a couple of ways of doing that. So one is you imagine yourself maybe moving a mouse with your hand, or you can then, which Nolan talked about, like imagine moving the cursor with your mind. Like, but it's like there is a cognitive step here that's fascinating, because you have to use the brain, and you have to learn how to use the brain, and you kind of have to figure it out dynamically, like because you reward yourself if it works. So you there's a step that it's just a fascinating step, because you have to get the brain to start firing in the right way.
Yeah,
and you do that by imagining like fake it till you make it. And all of a sudden it creates the right kind of signal that if decoded correctly, can create the kind of effect. And then there's like noise around that you have to figure all of that out. But on the human side, imagine the cursor moving is what you have to do.
Yeah, he says using the force.
The force. I mean, isn't that just like fascinating to you that it works? Like to me, it's like, holy shit, that actually works. Like you could move a cursor with your mind.
As much as you're learning to use that thing's also learning about you. Like our models constantly updating the weights to say, oh, if someone is thinking about, this sophisticated forms of like spiking patterns, like that actually means to do this, right?
So the machine is learning about the human and the human is learning about the machine. So there's adaptability to the signal processing, the decoding step. And then there's the adaptation of Nolan, the human being. Like the same way if you give me a new mouse and I move it, I learn very quickly about its sensitivity. So I'll learn to move it slower.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other kind of signal drift and all that kind of stuff they have to adapt to.
Mm-hmm.
So both are adapting to each other.
Correct.
That's a fascinating like software challenge on both sides. The software on both, on the human software and
the organic and the inorganic.
The organic and the inorganic. Anyway, so sorry to rudely interrupt. So there's the selection that Nolan has passed with flying colors. So everything, including that it's a BCI friendly home, all of that. So what is the process of the surgery, the implantation, the first moment when he gets to use the system?
The end to end, we say patient in to patient out, is anywhere between 2 to 4 hours. In particular case for Nolan, it was about 3.5 hours. And there's many steps leading to, the actual robot insertion, right? So there's anesthesia, induction, and we do intra-op CT imaging to make sure that we're, drilling the hole in the right location. And this is also pre-planned beforehand. Someone like Nolan would go through fMRI, and then they can think about wiggling their hand. Obviously due to their injury, it's not going to actually lead to any sort of intended output, but it's the same part of the brain that actually lights up when you're imagining moving your finger to actually moving your finger. And that's one of the ways in which we can actually know where to place our threads, because we want to go into what's called the hand knob area in the motor cortex, and as much as possible densely put our electrode threads. So yeah, we do intra-op CT imaging to make sure and double check the location of the craniectomy, and surgeon comes in, does their thing in terms of like skin incision, craniectomy, so drilling of the skull. And then there's many different layers of the brain. There's what's called the dura, which is a very, very thick layer that surrounds the brain. That gets actually resected in a process called thorectomy. And that then exposes the pia in the brain that you want to insert. And by the time it's been around anywhere between 1 to 1.5 hours, robot comes in, does this thing, placement of the target, inserting of the thread. That takes anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes. In the particular case for Nolan, it was just under or just over 30 minutes. And then after that, the surgeon comes in. There's a couple other steps of like actually inserting the dural substitute layer to protect the thread as well as the brain. And then screw in the implant, and then skin flap, and then suture, and then you're out.
So when Nolan woke up, what was that like? What was the recovery like? And when was the first time he was able to use it?
So he was actually immediately after the surgery, like an hour after the surgery, as he was waking up, we did turn on the device, make sure that we are recording neural signals. And we actually did have a couple signals that we noticed that he can actually modulate. And what I mean by modulate is that he can think about clenching his fist, and you could see the spike disappear and appear.
That's awesome.
And that was immediate,
Yeah.
right? Immediate after in the recovery room.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
That's a human being. I mean, what did that feel like for you? this device in a human being, a first step of a gigantic journey. I mean, it's a historic moment. Even just that spike, just to be able to modulate that.
Obviously there have been other, as you mentioned, pioneers that have participated in these groundbreaking BCI, investigational early feasibility studies. So we're obviously standing in the shoulders of the giants here. We're not the first ones to actually put electrodes in a human brain. But I mean, just leading up to the surgery, there was I definitely could not sleep. It's the first time that you're working in a completely new environment. We had a lot of confidence based on our benchtop testing, or preclinical R&D studies that the mechanism, the threads, the insertion, all that stuff is very safe, and that it's obviously ready for doing this in a human. But there's still a lot of unknown about, can the needle actually insert? I mean, we brought something like 40 needles just in case they break, and we ended up using only one. But I mean, that was a level of just complete unknown, right? Because it's a very, very different environment, and I mean, that's why we do clinical trial in the first place, to be able to test these things out. So extreme nervousness and many sleepless night leading up to the surgery, and definitely the day before the surgery. And it was an early morning surgery. Like we started at 7 a.m. And by the time it was around 10:30, it was everything was done. But I mean, first time seeing that, well, number one, just huge relief that this thing is doing what it's supposed to do. And two, I mean, just immense amount of gratitude for Nolan and his family, and then many others that have applied and that we've spoken to and will speak to are, I mean, true pioneers in everywhere. And I sort of call them the neural astronauts or neural not.
You're not, yeah.
These amazing, just like in the 60s, right? Like these amazing just pioneers, right? Exploring the unknown outwards. In this case, it's inward. But an incredible amount of gratitude for them to, just participate and play a part. And it's a journey that we're embarking on together. But also, like, I think it was just that was a very, very important milestone, but our work was just starting. So a lot of just kind of anticipation for, okay, what needs to happen next? What are set of sequences of events that needs to happen for us to, make it worthwhile for, both Nolan as well as us.
Just to linger on that, just a huge congratulations to you and the
Thank
team
you.
for that milestone. I know there's a lot of work left, but that's really exciting to see. There's that's a source of hope. It's this first big step, opportunity to help hundreds of thousands of people, and then maybe expand the realm of the possible for the human mind for millions of people in the future. So it's really exciting. So like the opportunities are all ahead of us, and to do that safely and to do that effectively was really fun to see. As an engineer, just watching other engineers come together and do an epic thing, that was awesome. So huge congrats.
Thank you. It's could not have done it without the team. And I mean, that's the other thing that I told the team as well, of just this immense sense of optimism for the future. I mean, it's a very important moment for the company, needless to say, as well as hopefully for many others out there that we can help.
So speaking of challenges, Neuralink published a blog post describing that some of the threads are retracted, and so the performance as measured by bits per second dropped at first, but then eventually was regained. And that the whole story of how it was regained is super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely something I'll talk to Bliss and to Nolan about. But in general, can you speak to this whole experience? How was the performance regained? And just the technical aspects of the threads being retracted and moving.
The main takeaway is that in the end, the performance have come back, and it's actually gotten better than it was before. He's actually just beat the world record yet again last week. To 8.5 BPS. So I mean, he's just cranking and he's just improving.
The previous one was that he set was 8.
Correct.
He set 8.5.
Yeah, the previous world record in human was 4.6.
Yeah.
So it's almost double.
Yeah.
And his goal is to try to get to 10, which is roughly around kind of the median Neuralinker using a mouse with the hand. So it's getting there.
So yes, so the performance was regained.
Yeah, better than before. So that's a story on its own of what took the BCI team to recover that performance. It was actually mostly on kind of the signal processing end. So as I mentioned, we were kind of looking at these spike outputs from the our electrodes, and what happened is that kind of 4 weeks into the surgery, we noticed that the threads have slowly come out of the brain. And the way in which we noticed this at first, obviously, is that, I think Nolan was the first to notice that his performance was degrading. And I think at the time, we were also trying to do a bunch of different experimentation, different algorithms, different sort of UI, UX. So it was expected that there will be variability in the performance. But we did see kind of a steady decline. And then also the way in which we measure the health of the electrodes or whether they're in the brain or not is by measuring impedance of the electrode. So we look at kind of the interfacial, kind of the Randall circuit, they say, the capacitance and the resistance between the electrosurface and the medium. And if that changes in some dramatic ways, we have some indication. Or if you're not seeing spikes on those channels, you have some indications that something's happening there. And what we notice is that looking at those impedance plot and spike rate plots, and also because we have those electrodes recording along the depth, you were seeing some sort of movement that indicated that threads were being pulled out. And that obviously will have an implication on the model side, because if the number of inputs that are going into the model is changing because you have less of them, that model needs to get updated, right? And but there were still signals, and as I mentioned, similar to how even when you place the signals on the surface of the brain or farther away, like outside the skull, you still see some useful signals. What we started looking at is not just the spike occurrence through this BOSS algorithm that I mentioned, but we started looking at just the power of the frequency band that is interesting for Nolan to be able to modulate. So once we kind of changed the algorithm for the implant to not just give you the BOSS output, but also these spike band power output, that helped us sort of refine the model with the new set of inputs. And that was the thing that really ultimately gave us the performance back. In terms of, and obviously, like the thing that we want ultimately, and the thing that we are working towards, is figuring out ways in which we can keep those threads intact for as long as possible, so that we have many more channels going into the model. That's by far the number one priority that the team is currently embarking on, to understand how to prevent that from happening. The thing that I will say also is that, as I mentioned, this is the first time ever that we're putting these threads in a human brain. And human brain, just for size reference, is 10 times that of the monkey brain or the sheep brain. And it's just a very, very different environment. It moves a lot more. It's like actually moved a lot more than we expected when we did Nolan's surgery. And it's just a very, very different environment than what we're used to. And this is why we do clinical trial, right? We want to uncover some of these issues and failure modes earlier than later. So in many ways, it's provided us with this enormous amount of data and information to be able to solve this. And this is something that Neuralink is extremely good at. Once we have set of clear objective and engineering problem, we have enormous amount of talents across many, many disciplines to be able to come together and fix the problem very, very quickly.
But it sounds like one of the fascinating challenges here is for the system on the decoding side to be adaptable across different timescales. So whether it's movement of threads or different aspects of signal drift, sort of on the software of the human brain, something changing. Like Nolan talks about cursor drift that could be corrected, and there's a whole UX challenge to how to do that. So it sounds like adaptability is like a fundamental property that has to be engineered in.
It is, and I mean, I think, I mean, as a company, we're extremely vertically integrated. We make these thin film arrays in our own microfab.
Yeah, there's like you said, built in house. This whole paragraph here from this blog post is pretty gangster. Building the technologies described above has been no small feat. And there's a bunch of links here that I recommend people click on. We constructed in-house microfabrication capabilities to rapidly produce various iterations of thin film arrays that constitute our electrode threads. We created a custom femtosecond laser mill to manufacture components with micro-level precision. I think there's a tweet associated with this.
That's a whole thing that we can get into.
Yeah, this okay. What are we looking at here? This thing. This is so in less than 1 minute, our custom-made femtosecond laser mill cuts this geometry in the tips of our needles. So we're looking at this weirdly shaped needle. The tip is only 10 to 12 microns in width, only slightly larger than the diameter of a red blood cell. The small size allows threads to be inserted with minimal damage to the cortex. Okay, so what's interesting about this geometry? So we're looking at this just geometry of a needle.
Yeah. This is the needle that's engaging with the loops in the thread.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the ones that thread the loop, and then peel it from the silicon backing, and then this is the thing that gets inserted into the tissue, and then this pulls out, leaving the thread. Mm-hmm. And this kind of a notch, or the shark tooth that we used to call, is the thing that actually is grasping the loop, and then it's designed in such that when you pull out, leaves the loop.
And the robot is controlling this needle.
Correct. So this is actually housed in a cannula, and basically the robot has a lot of the optics that look for where the loop is. There's actually a 4 or 5 nanometer light that actually causes the polyimide to fluoresce so that you can locate the location of the loop.
So the loop lights up?
Yeah, they do. It's a micron precision process.
What's interesting about the robot that it takes to do that? That's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy that a robot is able to get this kind of precision.
Yeah, our robot is quite heavy. Our current version of it, it's like a giant granite slab that weighs about a ton, because it needs to be sensitive to vibration, environmental vibration, and then as the head is moving at the speed that it's moving, there's a lot of kind of motion control to make sure that you can achieve that level of precision. A lot of optics that kind of zoom in on that. We're working on next generation of the robot that is lighter, easier to transport. I mean, it is a feat to move the robot.
And it's far superior to a human surgeon at this time for this particular task.
Absolutely. I mean, let alone you try to actually thread a loop in a sewing kit. This is like, we're talking like fractions of human hair. These things it's not visible.
So continuing the paragraph, we developed novel hardware and software testing systems such as our accelerated lifetime testing racks and simulated surgery environment, which is pretty cool, to stress test and validate the robustness of our technologies. We performed many rehearsals of our surgeries to refine our procedures and make them second nature. This is pretty cool. We practice surgeries on proxies with all the hardware and instruments needed in our mock or in the engineering space. This helps us rapidly test and measure. So there's like proxies.
Yeah, this proxy is super cool, actually. So there's a 3D printed skull from the images that is taken at Barrow, as well as this hydrogel mix, sort of synthetic polymer thing that actually mimics the mechanical properties of the brain. Mm-hmm. It also has vasculature of the person. Cool. So basically what we're talking about here, and there's a lot of work that has gone into making this said proxy, that It's about like finding the right concentration of these different synthetic polymers to get the right set of consistency for the needle dynamics, as they're being inserted. But we practice this surgery with the person, Nolan's basically physiology and brain, many, many times prior to actually doing the surgery.
So
to
every step,
every step. Yeah. Like, where does someone stand? Like, I mean, like what you're looking at is the picture. This is in our office of this kind of corner of the robot engineering space that we, have created this like mock OR space that looks exactly like what they would experience, all the staff would experience during their actual surgery. So, I mean, it's just kind of like any dance rehearsal where you know exactly where you're going to stand at what point, and you just practice that over and over and over again with an exact anatomy of someone that you're going to surgerize. And it got to a point where a lot of our engineers, when we created a craniectomy, they're like, "Oh, that looks very familiar. We've seen that before."
Yeah, man. There's wisdom you can gain through doing the same thing over and over and over. It's like Jiro Dreams of Sushi kind of thing. Because then it's like Olympic athletes visualize the Olympics, and then once you actually show up, it feels you. It feels like any other day. It feels almost boring winning the gold medal because you visualized this so many times, you've practiced this so many times that nothing about it is new. It's boring. You win the gold medal, it's boring, and the experience they talk about is mostly just relief. Probably that they don't have to visualize it anymore.
Yeah, the power of the mind to visualize, and where I mean, there's a whole field that studies where muscle memory lies in cerebellum. Yeah, it's incredible.
I think it's a good place to actually ask sort of the big question that people might have is, how do we know every aspect of this that you described is safe?
At the end of the day, the gold standard is to look at the tissue. What sort of trauma did you cause the tissue, and does that correlate to whatever behavioral anomalies that you may have seen? And that's the language to which we can communicate about the safety of inserting something into the brain and what type of trauma that you can cause. So we actually have an entire department of pathology that looks at these tissue slices. There are many steps that are involved in doing this. Once you have studies that are launched to with particular endpoints in mind, at some point you have to euthanize the animal, and then you go through necropsy to kind of collect the brain tissue samples. You fix them in formalin, and you like roast them, you section them, and you look at individual slices just to see what kind of reaction or lack thereof exists. So that's the kind of the language to which FDA speaks, and as well for us to kind of evaluate the safety of the insertion mechanism as well as the threads at various different time points. Both acute, so anywhere between 0 to 3 months to beyond 3 months.
So those are kind of the details of an extremely high standard of safety that has to be reached.
Correct.
FDA supervises this, but there's in general just a very high standard. And every aspect of this, including the surgery. I think Matthew McDougall has mentioned that like the standard is, let's say, how to put it politely, higher than maybe some other operations that we take for granted. So the standard for all the surgical stuff here is extremely high.
Very high. I mean, it's a highly, highly regulated environment with, the governing agencies that scrutinize every medical device that gets marketed. And I think it's a good thing. It's good to have those high standards, and we try to hold extremely high standards to kind of understand what sort of damage, if any, these innovative emerging technologies and new technologies that we're building are. And so far we have been extremely impressed by lack of immune response from these threads.
Speaking of which, you talk to me with excitement about the histology and some of the images that you're able to share. Can you explain to me what we're looking at?
Yeah, so what you're looking at is a stained tissue image. So this is a sectioned tissue slice from an animal that was implanted for 7 months, so kind of a chronic time point. And you're seeing all these different colors, and each color indicates specific types of cell types. So purple and pink are astrocytes and microglia, respectively. They're types of glial cells. And yeah, the other thing that people may not be aware of is your brain is not just made up of soup of neurons and axons. There are other cells like glial cells that actually kind of is the glue and also react if there are any trauma or damage to the tissue.
But the brown are the neurons here.
The brown are the neurons and the blue is nuclei. So what you're seeing is in this kind of macro image, you're seeing these like circle highlighted in white, the insertion sites. And when you zoom into one of those, you see the threads. And then in this particular case, I think we're seeing about the 16 wires that are going into the page. And the incredible thing here is the fact that you have the neurons that are these brown structures or brown circular or elliptical thing that are actually touching and abutting the threads. So what this is saying is that there's basically zero trauma that's caused during this insertion. And with these neural interfaces, these microelectrodes that you insert, that is one of the most common mode of failure. So when you insert these threads, like the Utah array, it causes neuronal death around the site because you're inserting a foreign object, right? And that kind of elicit these like immune response through microglia and astrocytes. They form this like protective layer around it. Oh, not only are you killing the neuron cells, but you're also creating this protective layer that then basically prevents you from recording neural signals because you're getting further and further away from the neurons that you're trying to record. And that is the biggest mode of failure. And in this particular example, in that inset, it's about 50 micron with that scale bar. The neurons seem to be attracted to it.
And so there's certainly no trauma. That's such a beautiful image, by the way. So the brown are the neurons. For some reason, I can't look away. It's really cool.
And the way that these things, your tissues generally don't have these beautiful colors. This is multiplex stain that uses these different proteins that are staining these at different colors. We use very standard set of staining techniques with HE, EBA1, and NUN, and GFAP. So if you go to the next image, this is also kind of illustrates the second point because you can make an argument. And initially, when we saw the previous image, we said, "Oh, are the threads just floating? Like, what is happening here? Like, are we actually looking at the right thing?" So what we did is we did another stain, and this is all done in house, of this Masson's trichrome stain, which is in blue, that shows these collagen layers. So the blue basically, like, you don't want the blue around the implant threads because that means that there's some sort of scarring that's happened. And what you're seeing, if you look at individual threads, is that you don't see any of the blue, which means that there has been absolutely or very, very minimal to a point where it's not detectable amount of trauma in these inserted threads.
So that presumably is one of the big benefits of having this kind of flexible thread.
So we think this is primarily due to the size as well as the flexibility of the threads. Also the fact that R1 is avoiding vasculature, so we're not disrupting or we're not causing damage to the vessels and not breaking any of the blood-brain barrier has, basically caused the immune response to be muted.
But this is also a nice illustration of the size of things. So this is the tip of the thread.
Yeah, those are neurons. They're
neurons, and this is the thread listening, and the electrodes are positioned how?
Yeah, so this is what you're looking at is not electrode themselves. Those are the conductive wires. So each of those should probably be 2 micron in width. So what we're looking at is we're looking at the coronal slice. So we're looking at some slice of the tissue. So as you go deeper, you'll obviously have less and less of the tapering of the thread. But yeah, the point basically being that there's just kind of cells around the inserted site, which is just an incredible thing to see. I've just never seen anything like this.
How easy and safe is it to remove the implant?
Yeah, so it depends on when. In the first 3 months or so after the surgery, there's a lot of kind of tissue modeling that's happening. Similar to when you get a cut. You obviously start over first couple weeks, or depending on the size of the wound, scar tissue forming, right? There are these like contracted, and then in the end, they turn into scab and you can scab it off. The same thing happens in the brain. And it's a very dynamic environment. And before the scar tissue or the neomembrane or the new membrane that forms, it's quite easy to just pull them out. And there's minimal trauma that's caused during that. Once the scar tissue forms, and with Nolan as well, we believe that that's the thing that's currently anchoring the threads. So we haven't seen any more movements since then. So they're quite stable. It gets harder to actually completely extract the threads. So our current method for removing the device is cutting the thread, leaving the tissue intact, and then unscrewing and taking the implant out. Mm-hmm. And that hole is now going to be plugged with either another Neuralink or just with kind of a PEEK-based, plastic-based cap.
Is it okay to leave the threads in there forever?
Yeah, we think so. We've done studies where we left them there, and one of the biggest concerns that we had is like, do they migrate and do they get to a point where they should not be? We haven't seen that. Again, once the scar tissue forms, they get anchored in place. And I should also say that when we say upgrades, like we're not just talking in theory here. Like we've actually upgraded many times. Most of our monkeys or non-human primates, NHP, have been upgraded. Pager, who you saw playing Mind Pong, has the latest version of the device since 2 years ago and is seemingly very happy and healthy and fat.
So what's designed for the future, the upgrade procedure? So maybe for Nolan, what would the upgrade look like? It was essentially what you're mentioning. Is there a way to upgrade sort of the device internally, where you take it apart and sort of keep the capsule and upgrade the internals?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different things here. So for Nolan, if we were to upgrade, what we would have to do is either cut the threads or extract the threads, depending on kind of the situation there in terms of how they're anchored or scarred in. If you were to remove them with the dural substitute, you have an intact brain, so you can reinsert different threads with the updated implant package. There are a couple different other ways that we're thinking about the future of what the upgradable system looks like. One is, at the moment we currently remove the dura, this kind of thick layer that protects the brain, but that actually is the thing that actually proliferates the scar tissue formation. So typically, the general good rule of thumb is you want to leave the nature as is and not disrupt it as much. So we're looking at ways to insert the threads through the dura, which comes with different set of challenges, such as, it's a pretty thick layer. So how do you actually penetrate that without breaking the needle? So we're looking at different needle design for that, as well as the kind of the loop engagement. The other biggest challenges are it's quite opaque optically with white light illumination. So how do you avoid still this biggest advantage that we have of avoiding vasculature? How do you image through that? How do you actually still mediate that? So there are other imaging techniques that we're looking at to enable that. But the goal, our hypothesis is that, and based on some of the early evidence that we have, doing through the dura insertion will cause minimal scarring that causes them to be much easier to extract over time. And the other thing that we're also looking at, this is going to be a fundamental change in the implant architecture, is at the moment, it's a monolithic single implant that comes with a thread that's bonded together, so you can't actually separate the thing out. Mm-hmm. But you can imagine having two-part implant. Bottom part, that is the thread that are inserted, that has the chips and maybe a radio and some power source. And then you have another implant that has more of the computational heavy load, mm-hmm. and the bigger battery. And then one can be under the dura, one can be above the dura, like, being the plug for the skull. They can talk to each other, but the thing that you want to upgrade, the computer and not the threads, if you want to upgrade that, you just go in there, remove the screws and then put in the next version, and, you're off the, it's a very, very easy surgery too. Like you do a skin incision, slip this in, screw, probably be able to do this in 10 minutes.
So that would allow you to reuse the threads, sort of.
Correct.
So, I mean, this leads to the natural question of what is the pathway to scaling the increase in the number of threads? Is that a priority? Is that like what's the technical challenge there?
Yeah, that is a priority. So for next versions of the implant, the key metrics that we're looking to improve are number of channels, just recording from more and more neurons. We have a pathway to actually go from currently 1,000 to hopefully 3,000, if not 6,000 by end of this year.
Wow.
And then end of next year, we want to get to, even more, 16,000.
Wow.
There's a couple limitations to that. One is, obviously being able to photolithographically print those wires. As I mentioned, it's 2 micron in width and spacing. Obviously, there are chips that are much more advanced than those types of resolution, and we have some of the tools that we have brought in-house to be able to do that. So traces will be narrower, just so that you have to have more of the wires coming up into the chip. Chips also cannot linearly consume more energy as you have more and more channels. So there's a lot of innovations in the circuit, and architecture as well as the circuit design topology to make them lower power. You need to also think about if you have all of these spikes, how do you send that off to the end application? So you need to think about bandwidth limitation there and potentially innovations in signal processing. Physically, one of the biggest challenges is going to be the interface. It's always the interface that breaks. Bonding this thin film array to the electronics, it starts to become very, very highly dense interconnects. So how do you connectorize that? There's a lot of innovations in kind of the 3D integrations in the recent years that we can take advantage of. One of the biggest challenges that we do have is forming this hermetic barrier, right? This is an extremely harsh environment that we're in, the brain. So how do you protect it from, like the brain trying to kill your electronics to also your electronics leaking things that you don't want into the brain, and that forming that hermetic barrier is going to be a very, very big challenge that we, I think are actually well suited to tackle.
How do you test that? Like, what's the development environment?
Yeah,
to simulate that kind of harshness.
Yeah, so this is where the accelerated life tester essentially is a brain in a vat.
Mm-hmm.
It literally is a vessel that is made up of, and again, for all intents and purpose for this particular types of tests, your brain is a salt water,
mm-hmm.
and you can also put some other set of chemicals like reactive oxygen species that get at kind of these interfaces and trying to cause a reaction to pull it apart. But you could also increase the rate at which these interfaces are aging by just increasing temperature. So every 10 degrees Celsius that you increase, you're basically accelerating time by 2x. And there's limit as to how much temperature you want to increase, because at some point there's some other nonlinear dynamics that causes you to have other nasty gases to form that just is not realistic in an environment. So what we do is we increase in our ALT chamber by 20 degrees Celsius, that increases the aging by four times. So essentially 1 day in ALT chamber is 4 day in calendar year. Mm-hmm. And we look at whether the implants still are intact, including the threads and
operation and all of that.
It obviously is not an exact same environment as a brain, because brain has mechanical, other more biological goops that attack at it. But it is a good testing environment for at least the enclosure and the strength of that enclosure. And I mean, we've had implants, the current version of the implant that has been in there for, close to 2.5 years, which is equivalent to a decade, and they seem to be fine.
So it's interesting that so basically close approximation is warm salt water. Hot salt water is a good testing environment.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm drinking Element, which is basically salt water, which is making me kind of. It doesn't have computational power the way the brain does, but maybe in terms of other characteristics, it's quite similar. Yeah. And I'm consuming it.
Yeah, you have to get it in the right pH too.
And then consciousness will emerge.
Yeah.
No. All right.
But by the way, the other thing that also is interesting about our enclosure is, if you look at our implant, it's not your common looking medical implant that usually is encased in a titanium can that's laser welded. We use this polymer called PCTFE, polychlorotrifluoroethylene, which is actually commonly used in blister packs. So when you have a pill and you're trying to pop the pill, there's like kind of that plastic membrane. That's what this is. No one's actually ever used this except us. And the reason we wanted to do this is because it's electromagnetically transparent. So when we talked about the electromagnetic inductive charging with titanium can, usually if you want to do something like that, you have to have a sapphire window, and it's a very, very tough process to scale.
So you're doing a lot of iteration here on every aspect of this: the materials, the software, the hard, all of it.
The whole shebang.
So you mentioned scaling. Is it possible to have multiple Neuralink devices as one of the ways of scaling? To have multiple Neuralink devices implanted?
That's the goal. Yeah, we've had. I mean, our monkeys have had 2 Neuralinks, one in each hemisphere, and then we're also looking at potential of having one in motor cortex, one in visual cortex, and one in wherever other cortex.
So focusing on a particular function, one Neuralink device.
Correct.
I mean, I wonder if there's some level of customization that can be done on the compute side. So for the motor cortex,
absolutely. That's the goal. And we talk about at Neuralink building a generalized neural interface to the brain. And that also is strategically how we're approaching this with marketing and also with regulatory, which is, hey, look, we have the robot, and the robot can access any part of the cortex. Right now, we're focused on motor cortex with current version of the N1 that's specialized for motor decoding tasks. But also at the end of the day, there's kind of a general compute available there. But typically, if you want to really get down to kind of hyper optimizing for power and efficiency, you do need to get to some specialized function, right? But what we're saying is that, hey, you are now used to this robotic insertion techniques, which took many years of showing data and conversation with the FDA, and also internally convincing ourselves that this is safe. And now the difference is that if we go to other parts of the brain, like visual cortex, which we're interested in as our second product, obviously it's a completely different environment. The cortex is laid out very, very differently. It's going to be more stimulation focused rather than recording, just kind of creating visual percepts. But in the end, we're using the same thin film array technology. We're using the same robot insertion technology. We're using the same, packaging technology. Now it's more the conversation is focused around what are the differences and what are the implications of those differences in safety and efficacy.
The way you said second product is both hilarious and awesome to me. That product being restoring sight for blind people. So can you speak to stimulating the visual cortex? I mean, the possibilities there are just incredible to be able to give that gift back to people who don't have sight or even any aspect of that. Can you just speak to the challenges of, there's several challenges here.
Oh, many.
One of which is, like you said, from recording to stimulation. Just any aspect of that you're both excited and see the challenges of.
Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying that we actually have been capable of stimulating through our thin film array as well as our electronics for years. We have actually demonstrated some of that capabilities for reanimating the limb in the spinal cord. Obviously for the current EFS study, we've hardware disabled that, so that's something that we wanted to embark as a separate journey. And obviously there are many different ways to write information into the brain. The way in which we're doing that is through electrical, passing electrical current and kind of causing that to really change the local environment so that you can sort of artificially cause kind of the neurons to depolarize in nearby areas. For vision specifically, the way our visual system works, it's both well understood. I mean, anything with kind of brain, there are aspects of it that's well understood, but in the end, like we don't really know anything. But the way visual system works is that you have photon hitting your eye, and in your eyes, there are these specialized cells called photoreceptor cells that convert the photon energy into electrical signals, and then that then gets projected to your back of your head, your visual cortex. It goes through actually thalamic system called LGN that then projects it out, and then in the visual cortex there's visual area 1 or V1, and then there's bunch of other higher level processing layers like V2, V3. And there are actually kind of interesting parallels. And when you study the behaviors of these convolutional neural networks, like what the different layers of the network is detecting, first they're detecting like these edges, and they're then detecting some more natural curves, and then they start to detect like objects, right? Kind of similar thing happens in the brain. And a lot of that has been inspired, and also, it's been kind of exciting to see some of the correlations there. But things like from there, where does cognition arise, and where's color encoded? There's just not a lot of fundamental understanding there. So in terms of kind of bringing sight back to those that are blind, there are many different forms of blindness. There's actually 1 million people in the US that are legally blind. That means like certain like score below in kind of the visual test. I think it's something like if you can see something at 20 feet distance that normal people can see at 200 feet distance, like if you're worse than that, you're legally blind.
So fundamentally, that means you can't function effectively.
Correct.
Using sight in the world.
Yeah, like to navigate your environment. And yeah, there are different forms of blindness. There are forms of blindness where there's some degeneration of your retina, these photoreceptor cells, and rest of your visual processing that I described is intact. And for those types of individuals, you may not need to maybe stick electrodes into the visual cortex. You can actually build retinal prosthetic devices that actually just replaces the function of that retinal cells that are degenerated. And there are many companies that are working on that. But that's a very small slice, albeit significant, still smaller slice of folks that are legally blind. If there's any damage along that circuitry, whether it's in the optic nerve or, just the LGN circuitry or any break in that circuit, that's not going to work for you. And the source of where you need to actually cause that visual percept to happen, because your biological mechanism is not doing that, is by placing electrodes in the visual cortex in the back of your head. And the way in which this would work is that you would have an external camera, whether it's something as unsophisticated as a GoPro, or some sort of wearable Ray-Ban type glasses that Meta's working on, that captures a scene, right? And that scene is then converted to a set of electrical impulses or stimulation pulses that you would activate in your visual cortex through these thin film arrays. And by playing some concerted kind of orchestra of these stimulation patterns, you can create what's called phosphenes, which are these kind of white yellowish dots that you can also create by just pressing your eyes. Mm-hmm. You can actually create those percepts by stimulating the visual cortex. And the name of the game is really have many of those and have those percepts the phosphenes be as small as possible, so that you can start to tell apart, like they're the individual pixels of the screen, right? So if you have many of those, potentially you'll be able to, in the long term, be able to actually get naturalistic vision. But in the like short term to maybe midterm, being able to at least be able to have object detection algorithms run on your glasses, the pre-processing units, and then being able to at least see the edges of things so you don't bump into stuff.
It's incredible. This is really incredible. So you basically would be adding pixels, and your brain would start to figure out what those pixels mean.
Yeah.
And like with different kinds of system and the signal processing on all fronts.
Yeah. The thing that actually, so a couple things. One is, obviously if you're blind from birth, the way brain works, especially in the early age, neuroplasticity is really nothing other than, kind of your brain and different parts of your brain fighting for the limited territory.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, very, very quickly you see cases where, people that are, I mean, you also hear about people who are blind that have heightened sense of hearing or some other senses. And the reason for that is because that cortex that's not used just gets taken over by these different parts of the cortex. So for those types of individuals, I mean, I guess they're going to have to now map some other parts of their senses into what they call vision, but it's going to be obviously a very, very different conscious experience. So I think that's an interesting caveat. The other thing that also is important to highlight is that we're currently limited by our biology in terms of the wavelength that we can see. There's a very, very small wavelength that is a visible light wavelength that we can see with our eyes. But when you have an external camera with this BCI system, you're not limited to that. You can have infrared, you can have UV, you can have whatever other spectrum that you want to see. And whether that gets mapped to some sort of weird conscious experience, I have no idea. But when oftentimes I talk to people about the goal of Neuralink being going beyond the limits of our biology. That's sort of what I mean.
And if you're able to control the kind of raw signal, is that when we use our sight, we're getting the photons and there's not much processing on it. If you're be able to control that signal, maybe you can do some kind of processing. Maybe you do object detection ahead of time.
Yeah.
You're doing some kind of pre-processing, and there's a lot of possibilities to explore that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just increasing sort of thermal imaging, that kind of stuff, but it's also just doing some kind of interesting processing.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, my theory of how like visual system works also is that, I mean, there's just so many things happening in the world, and there's a lot of photons that are going into your eye, and it's unclear exactly where some of the pre-processing steps are happening. But I mean, I actually think that just from a fundamental perspective, there's just so much, the reality that we're in, if it's a reality, is so there's so much data, and I think humans are just unable to actually like eat enough actually to process all that information. So there's some sort of filtering that does happen, whether that happens in the retina, whether that happens in different layers of the visual cortex, unclear. But like the analogy that I sometimes think about is, if your brain is a CCD camera and all of the information in the world is a sun, and when you try to actually look at the sun with the CCD camera, it's just going to saturate the sensors, right? Because it's an enormous amount of energy. So what you do is you end up adding these filters, right, to just kind of narrow the information that's coming to you and being captured. And I think, things like our experiences or our like drugs like propofol, that like anesthetic drug, or psychedelics, what they're doing is they're kind of swapping out these filters and putting in new ones or removing older ones and kind of controlling our conscious experience.
Yeah, man, not to distract from the topic, but I just took a very high dose of ayahuasca in the Amazon jungle. So yes, it's a nice way to think about it. You're swapping out different experiences, and with Neuralink being able to control that, primarily at first to improve function, not for entertainment purposes or enjoyment purposes, but
giving back lost functions.
Giving back lost functions, and that's especially when the function is completely lost. Mm-hmm. Anything is a huge help. Would you implant a Neuralink device in your own brain?
Absolutely. I mean, maybe not right now, but absolutely.
What kind of capability, once reached, you would start getting real curious and almost get a little antsy, like jealous of people that get as you watch them get implanted?
Yeah, I mean, even with our early participants, if they start to do things that I can't do, which I think is in the realm of possibility for them to be able to get 15, 20, if not like 100 bps, right? There's nothing that fundamentally stops us from being able to achieve that type of performance. um, I mean, I would certainly get jealous that they can do that.
I should say that watching Nolan, I get a little jealous because he's having so much fun, and it seems like such a chill way to play video games.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the thing that also is hard to appreciate sometimes is that he's doing these things while while talking, and I mean, it's multitasking, right? So it's clearly, it's obviously cognitively intensive, but similar to how when we talk, we move our hands, like these things, like you like are multitasking. I mean, he's able to do that, and you won't be able to do that with other assistive technology, as far as I'm aware. If you're obviously using like an eye tracking device, you're very much fixated on that thing that you're trying to do. And if you're using voice control, I mean, like if you say some other stuff, yeah, you don't get to use that.
Yeah, the multitasking aspect of that is really interesting. So it's not just the BPS for the primary task; it's the parallelization of multiple tasks. If you measure the BPS for the entirety of the human organism, so if you're talking and doing a thing with your mind and looking around, also. But I mean, there's just a lot of parallelization that can be happening.
Yeah. But I mean, I think at some point for him, like if he wants to really achieve those high level BPS, it does require like full attention, right? And that's a separate circuitry that is a big mystery, like how attention works, and
Yeah, attention, like cognitive load. I've read a lot of literature on people doing two tasks. Like you have your primary task and a secondary task, and the secondary task is a source of distraction. And how does that affect the performance of the primary task? And there's, depending on the task, there's a lot of interesting. I mean, this is an interesting computational device, right? And I think there's,
to say the least,
a lot of novel insights that can be gained from everything. I mean, I personally am surprised that no one's able to do such incredible control of the cursor while talking, and also being nervous at the same time, because he's talking like all of us are. If you're talking in front of the camera, you get nervous. So all of those are coming into play, and he's able to still achieve high performance. Surprising. I mean, all of this is really amazing. And I think just after researching this really in depth, I kind of want a Neuralink. Like
get in the line.
And also the safety, get in line. Well, we should say the registry is for people who have quadriplegia and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so there'll be a separate line for people. They're just curious, like myself. So now that Nolan, patient P1, is part of the ongoing Prime study, what's the high level vision for P2, P3, P4, P5, and just the expansion into other human beings that are getting to experience this implant?
Yeah, I mean, the primary goal is, for our study in the first place, is to achieve safety endpoints, just understand safety of this device as well as the implantation process. And also at the same time, understand the efficacy and the impact that it could have on the potential users' lives. And just because you have, and you're living with tetraplegia, it doesn't mean your situation is same as another person living with tetraplegia. It's widely varying. And it's something that we're hoping to also understand how our technology can serve not just a very small slice of those individuals, but broader group of individuals, and being able to get the feedback to just really build the best product for them. So our there's obviously also goals that we have, and the primary purpose of the early feasibility study is to learn from each and every participant to improve the device, improve the surgery before we embark on what's called a pivotal study that then is a much larger trial that starts to look at statistical significance of your endpoints. And that's required before you can then market the device. And that's how it works in the U.S. and just generally around the world. That's the process you follow. So our goal is to really just understand from people like Nolan, P2, P3, future participants, what aspects of our device needs to improve. If it turns out that people are like, I really don't like the fact that it lasts only 6 hours. I want to be able to use this computer for, like 24 hours. I mean, that is a, user needs and user requirements, which we can only find out from just being able to engage with them.
So before the pivotal study, there's kind of like a rapid innovation based on individual experiences. You're learning from individual people how they use it, like the high resolution details in terms of like cursor control and signal and all that kind of stuff to like life experience.
Yeah. So there's hardware changes, but also just firmware updates. So even when we had that sort of recovery event for Nolan, he now has the new firmware that he has been updated with, and it's similar to how like your phones get updated all the time with new firmwares for security patches, whatever new functionality, UI, right? And that's something that is possible with our implant. It's not a static one-time device that can only do the thing that it said it can do. I mean, similar to Tesla, you can do over-the-air firmware updates, and now you have completely new user interface and all this bells and whistles and improvements on everything, like the latest, right? That's when we say generalized platform, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's really cool how the app that Nolan is using. There's like calibration, all that kind of stuff, and then there's update. you just click and get an update. What other future capabilities are you kind of looking to? You said vision. That's a fascinating one.
Mm-hmm.
What about sort of accelerated typing or speech or this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
What else is there?
Those are still in the realm of movement program. So largely speaking, we have two programs. We have the movement program and we have the vision program. The movement program, currently is focused around the digital freedom. As you can easily guess, if you can control 2D cursor in the digital space, you could move anything in the physical space. So robotic arms, wheelchair, your environment, or even really like whether it's through the phone or just like directly to those interfaces. So like to those machines. So we're looking at ways to kind of expand those types of capability, even for Nolan. That requires, conversation with the FDA and kind of showing safety data for, if there's a robotic arm or a wheelchair that, we can guarantee that they're not going to hurt themselves accidentally, right? It's very different if you're moving stuff in the digital domain versus like in the physical space. You can actually potentially cause harm to the participants. So we're working through that right now. Speech does involve different areas of the brain. Speech prosthetic is very, very fascinating. And there's actually been a lot of really amazing work that's been happening in academia. Sergei Stavitsky at UC Davis, Jamie Henderson, and late Krishna Shenoy at Stanford are doing just some incredible amount of work in improving speech neuroprosthetics, and those are actually looking more at parts of the motor cortex that are controlling these vocal articulators, and being able to like even by mouthing the word or imagine speech, you can pick up those signals. The more sophisticated, higher level processing areas like, the Broca's area or, Wernicke's area, those are still very, very big mystery in terms of the underlying mechanism of how all that stuff works. But I think Neuralink's eventual goal is to kind of understand those things and be able to provide a platform and tools to be able to understand that and study that.
This is where I get to the pothead questions. Do you think we can start getting insight into things like thought? So speech is, there's a muscular component, like you said. There's like the act of producing sounds. But then what about the internal things like cognition? Like low-level thoughts and high-level thoughts. Do you think we'll start noticing kind of signals that could be picked up, that could they could be understood, that could be maybe used in order to interact with the outside world?
In some ways, like I guess this starts to kind of get into the hard problem of consciousness. Mm-hmm. I mean, on one hand, all of these are at some point set of electrical signals that from there, maybe it in itself is giving you the cognition or the meaning, or somehow human mind is an incredibly amazing storytelling machine. So we're telling ourselves and fooling ourselves that there's some interesting meaning here. But I mean, I certainly think that BCI and really BCI at the end of the day is a set of tools that help you kind of study the underlying mechanisms in a both like local but also broader sense. And whether there's some interesting patterns of like electrical signal that means like you're thinking this versus, and you can either like learn from like many sets of data to correlate some of that and be able to do mind reading or not. I'm not sure. I certainly would not kind of rule that out as a possibility, but I think BCI alone probably can't do that. There's probably additional set of tools and framework, and also like just hard problem of consciousness at the end of the day is rooted in this philosophical question of like what is the meaning of it all? What's the nature of our existence? Like where's the mind emerge from this complex network? Like,
yeah, how does the subjective experience emerge from just a bunch of spikes, electrical spikes?
Yeah. I mean, we do really think about BCI and what we're building as a tool for understanding the mind, the brain, the only question that matters. There's actually there actually is some biological existence proof of like what it would take to kind of start to form some of these experiences that may be unique. If you actually look at every one of our brains, there are two hemispheres. There's a left-sided brain, there's a right-sided brain. And I mean, unless you have some other conditions, you normally don't feel like left legs or right legs. Like you just feel like one legs, right? So what is happening there, right? If you actually look at the two hemispheres, there's a structure that kind of connectorizes the two called the corpus callosum that is supposed to have around 200 to 300 million connections or axons. So whether that means that's the number of interface and electrodes that we need to create some sort of mind meld, or from that, like whatever new conscious experience that you can experience. But yeah, I do think that there's like kind of an interesting existence proof that we all have.
And that threshold is unknown at this time.
Oh yeah, these things, everything in this domain is speculation, right?
And then there will be you'd be continuously pleasantly surprised. Do you see a world where there's millions of people, like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people walking around with a Neuralink device or multiple Neuralink devices in their brain?
I do. First of all, there are, like, if you look at worldwide, people suffering from movement disorders and visual deficits. I mean, that's in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. So that alone, I think there's a lot of benefit and potential good that we can do with this type of technology. And when you start to get into kind of like psychiatric application, depression, anxiety, hunger, or obesity, right? Like mood control of appetite. I mean, that starts to become very real to everyone.
Not to mention that most people on Earth have a smartphone. And once BCI starts competing with a smartphone as a preferred methodology of interacting with the digital world, that also becomes an interesting thing.
Oh yeah, I mean this is even before going to that, right? I mean, there's like the entire world that could benefit from these types of things. And then, like if we're talking about kind of next generation of how we interface with, machines or even ourselves, in many ways, I think BCI can play a role in that. And some of the things that I also talk about is I do think that there is a real possibility that you could see 8 billion people walking around with Neuralink.
Well, thank you so much for pushing ahead. And I look forward to that exciting future.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with DJ Saw. And now, dear friends, here's Matthew McDougall, the head neurosurgeon at Neuralink. When did you first become fascinated with the human brain?
Since forever. As far back as I can remember, I've been interested in the human brain. I mean, I was, a thoughtful kid and a bit of an outsider. And you sit there thinking about what the most important things in the world are in your little tiny adolescent brain. And the answer that I came to, that I converged on, was that all of the things you can possibly conceive of as things that are important for human beings to care about are literally contained, in the skull, both the perception of them and their relative values, and the solutions to all our problems, and all of our problems are all contained in the skull. And if we knew more about how that worked, how the brain encodes information and generates desires and generates agony and suffering, we could do more about it. You think about all the really great triumphs in human history. You think about all the really horrific tragedies. You think about the Holocaust. You think about any prison full of human stories, and all of those problems